Well, thanks everyone for joining. My name is Wade Crowfoot and I serve as the California Natural Resources Secretary, and I have the honor of chairing our Ocean Protection Council. Very excited to get a lot of work done here today with my colleagues on the council. Our first order of business is to call the roll, so I will ask our colleague Jen Eckerly to do so.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. Secretary Blumenfeld.
Present.
Councilmember Dumlau.
Present.
Councilmember Diamond.
Present.
And I believe then Secretary Crowfoot. And
I am present.
Yes, we are waiting for Councilmember Brown to join us.
Great. Well, again, welcome all. This is an opportunity for us to provide any announcements we would like to share with each other and with members of the public. And I'll take prerogative to just share an announcement regarding our annual budget. So as many know, California's strong economic recovery paired with federal stimulus resulted in significant one-time funding that we ultimately became aware of this spring. That led the governor to propose a May revision of his proposed budget that he introduced back in January with significant one-time investments across the state in a broad number of priorities, from education to healthcare to the environment. We're really pleased that the governor proposed investments that advance many of our priorities within the OPC, including $200 million to the Ocean Protection Council for coastal wetland restoration. We know that is a critical nature-based solution to sea level rise and coastal erosion. Additionally, $20 million to spur environmentally responsible development of offshore renewable wind energy, which we'll talk about later today. $14 million for a Coastal Conservancy Explore the Coast program. $11.5 million to state parks to implement their recently issued sea level rise adaptation strategy to protect parks and communities along the coast. And then importantly, to the work of this council, $1.3 million for Fish and Wildlife's drift gillnet transition program, which has been something the OPC has contributed to already. On top of that, major funding to expand equitable access to the outdoors and the coast, including historic investments in our state park system. We're also glad to announce that the legislature has additionally recommended $31 million of funding to the Coastal Commission to support sea level rise planning in communities across California's coast. So everything that I just mentioned are proposals from our policymakers, and some of those proposals are being approved in real time by this June 15th budget deadline. And then other components that I've shared continue to be in dialogue between the governor and the legislature and will be decided on later this summer. But really excited about the work that the governor and the legislature are doing to really ensure that all of our coastal protection and restoration work is getting resourced. So let me turn it to any other council members for announcements. You can simply unmute yourself and share any announcements or raise your virtual hand. Jared, raising his actual hand.
First of all, this is June, and June 8th is World Oceans Day. So just wanted to recognize that UN created that day. And I was looking at the poster for it on June 8th, and it said two things. One, 70% of the planet is oceans, and 70% of the world's oxygen comes from the oceans. And I mean, part of what OPC does, and kind of as emblematic of World Oceans Day, is like, we don't think about the oceans every day unless we live on it. And I think the real role that this council plays is incredibly significant in getting attention back on to this resource, which is all around us on the planet, but often not considered. And in that light, Mark and I had to prepare, and I gave testimony in front of Congress on the DDT barrels off the San Pedro coast. And, in 1972, well, prior to 1972, we still dumped all manner of toxic crap off the coast of California. And that's what this hearing was about on World Oceans Day. But just, that wasn't that long ago. 1972, we banned ocean dumping, and we have credible toxic legacy. So it just reminded me of just the enormous amount of work that we have to do as a council, the very few entities that are actually focusing nationally, internationally on oceans, and just what a privilege it is to have in California an Ocean Protection Council that has this front and center. So happy World Oceans Day month.
Well put. Any other council members with announcements or anything that they'd like to share with each other and the public? Lots of work ahead of us, so we can just dive in. So today, our council will make several decisions to advance goals in our strategic plan. And you all know this, but for members of the public, the OPC is working off a 5-year strategic plan that it adopted early last year. And every time that we take an action, we work to link it back to a key priority in the strategic plan. So if you want to understand the priorities that we have as a council or the work that's underway, do check out the Ocean Protection Council strategic plan. Today, we're going to talk and act on ocean acidification and hypoxia, reducing the risk to marine life of entanglement from fishing gear, and of course, kelp forest recovery, which has been an ongoing priority of ours on the council. We're also going to have a discussion led by our colleague Jordan Diamond on offshore wind energy in California and the role that OPC should play in addressing critical data gaps, ensuring that stakeholder concerns and questions are addressed, and ultimately supporting an environmentally responsible energy source moving forward. So lots to get done today. Public comment obviously is a critical feature of this meeting, as it is all of our meetings. We'll take public comment on items 4 through 6 for each of those items 4, 5, and 6. If you have a specific comment related to that agenda item, you are welcome to provide it. And then in item 8 of the agenda, we'll provide an opportunity for public comment on topics that are not part of our agenda and our specific focus. I'll invite public comment during each of those items. If you want to make a comment, please raise your virtual hand, which you can do via one of the buttons on the bottom of your screen. And our team will unmute you, announce your name, and you'll be able to provide your comment to the council. If you called into a meeting via the telephone, press *9 to raise your hand. Again, that's *9 to raise your hand if you're linking in by telephone. Depending on how you've accessed the meeting, you also may need to unmute yourself. To be able to get through all of the work that we have here today, each public comment is limited to 2 minutes, and there'll be a timer on the screen to track your allotted time. Again, anyone interested in providing comment will need to raise her or his hand by the end of the agenda presentation. If we move on to another agenda item, it won't be possible to go back and make public comment on the previous agenda item. So with that, really excited to move our work forward, and we'll start with our intrepid leader, Mark Gold, with his executive director's report.
Thank you so much, Secretary Crowfoot. I'm just going to go over some highlights of what's in the executive director's report. As you saw, there's a lot of action that's been going on since the last meeting that we've had. And so let me start off by introducing some new staff members. We're almost fully staffed. It's taken a while to get back up there, but good to be there. We have Noah Ben Aderet, Sustainable Fisheries and Aquaculture Program Manager. He comes to us from Scripps. He got his PhD there, working on yellowtail. He's also a Knaus Fellow, so great credentials there. We also have Ella McDougall, and she's our Climate Change Program Manager. She has her master's from Middlebury Institute. She's also a Peace Corps volunteer in Peru and a Sea Grant Fellow. So she's going to be working with us, especially on a lot of sea level rise related issues. And then to help us administratively, we have Eunice Lemos Adier, and she's our administration and finance analyst, and she comes to us from UC Davis Medical Center, where she had worked for the better part of a decade. One of the things I really want to highlight that we've been doing, it's taken a while to put together, but we're here and incredibly excited about it. A number of staff worked on this, but a lot of time was really spent by Jen Eckerly and myself on putting together this summer internship program. And it's a paid internship program. It's the first time we've ever done it. We have 5 different interns that we chose amongst over 140 applicants. So it was just a great time reviewing 140 applications. But we have an amazing crew of people, and 3 of them have already started yesterday, and hopefully everyone's watching today. We have Isabella Alvarado, and she's an environmental science major at UCLA, obviously where my heart always is. Then we have Maren Colwell, society and environment, as well as poli-sci major at Cal Berkeley. Madhu Garmella, an environmental systems major at UC San Diego. And then Naide Herrera, who's environmental science and management major at Humboldt State. And then Claudia Sanchez Ray, who's a biology major at CSUN, Cal State Northridge. So a great group of people, and they're going to be working with us on a wide variety of different issues on the science and policy and equity issues in particular. We also have another intern from Stanford in their Stanford in Government Fellowship, Molly Glickman, who's a biology and poli-sci major, and she will work with us on plastics and microplastics. So great to have a good crew here this summer. We wish it wasn't virtual, but maybe we'll have some opportunity to bring them up at least for a day or so to work in Sacramento. We also started work on the equity plan. We've talked about that quite a bit here. Just wanted to let you know, we started meeting with the Better World Group. Maria Rodriguez is our project manager on that, and we've been working with Cecilia Estelano, Asma Mahdi, and others on that. And so that's begun in earnest, and really happy to mention that. With that, could I see the slides, please? Thanks, James. So very excited to announce that we've finalized the guiding principles for sustainable marine aquaculture in California. The best way to look at these is that they're interim and really trying to provide guidance the same way that we've been doing on sea level rise for all the efforts going on in California on aquaculture. Thanks to Secretary Crowfoot for leading the convening effort. It really makes a huge difference when he's engaged and at these meetings, which he was. This was put together by a wide variety of different state agencies, including California Coastal Commission, Fish and Wildlife, Fish and Game Commission, California Department of Food and Agriculture, State Water Resources Control Board, State Lands Commission, obviously the OPC, the Coastal Conservancy, and California Department of Public Health. And so we worked together. I probably met close to half a dozen times. And putting these together is the first time that these have been released publicly. So hopefully people get a chance to take a look at it. As you can see, there's 6 major principles here. They seem pretty common sense. Under each one of them, there's a great deal more detail, around 5-6 bullets of detail. And so as you see, develop and utilize best available science, ensure aquaculture sustainability, build governance and management partnerships, ensure effective aquaculture planning, develop and implement efficient and effective aquaculture oversight, and then protect public health and food safety. And I just want to remind everybody, obviously, that enhancing our aquaculture program and really making it a sustainable aquaculture program in California is one of the priorities within our strategic plan. And this goes quite a ways towards getting alignment with all the various different state agencies. We all learned a lot from each other. We hadn't really talked to the people in agriculture or the people in public health and how they look at this issue. That was very, very helpful. And I think you can see that reflected in some of the specificity in the principles. And this is really going to guide the state for the next 2 to 3 years while we're developing with these partners, but especially Fish and Wildlife and Fish and Game Commission, the first ever aquaculture action plan for the state of California. And so this will serve us quite well in the interim until that plan's being developed. And we're working with UC Santa Barbara NC's program, as well as UCC grant on that activity. And that started a couple of months ago as well. And these principles are going to guide the action plan that's being developed. So just great news there, and really proud of the effort that numerous staff put into making this happen. And I think it really came out well. So hopefully people spend some time with it. Next slide. So now for something completely different, and this will be the last thing that I cover, which is, you may recall last October that we unveiled a draft campaign on sea level rise, and really how do we get this information out to the public, get people to care about sea level rise and climate, and really what can we all do about it? Not only getting informed, so an awareness campaign, but also trying to get more engaged on this issue. And it's a big challenge, as you can imagine, with a modest budget, and obviously with the complexity of the communities that live along California's coast. So without going into detail on what happened to the last campaign, we shifted based on recommendations from communications staff in various different departments to a different approach. And we're very happy with how this has turned out. And the concept is the ocean is moving in. So it's a tongue-in-cheek way of making the public understand that sea level rise is real. So what you can see here in this slide that covers a lot of different applications of the actual campaign is, you see a beautiful, cute little harbor seal pup sitting in a dog bed, and really making you understand that that sea level rise isn't something that we need to deal with in the future, but that the ocean is moving in right now. It's a little preposterous intentionally, as you can see on the far right, where you have an octopus arm reaching into your popcorn bowl to sort of let you understand that this is again happening right now. This campaign, there's going to be a combination of various different approaches here. There's going to be outdoor, as you can see, online versions of advertising. And then there's also going to be a video, a 30 and a 15 spot that'll be put together that's going to run as well. And so that should probably film maybe in the next month or so. And our hope is to launch the campaign in earnest sometime in August, maybe late August is about the pace that we're going on right now. So we're really excited about it. And obviously, as more of the actual creative is developed and the collateral that goes with it, we'll make sure that we share it with the entire OPC team here. And on top of that, just as a reminder, there's also a sea level rise website. And again, thanks to the communications team and our own staff with Justine and the climate team, as well as Jen and others who've been working on this, that actual website should be ready to go right around that launch as well. And our hope is, and I think Secretary Crowfoot's okay with this, is that website in particular will be a CNRA website. So it's not just OPC, because obviously you want to go where the traffic is highest, and a lot more people visit the CNRA website than visit the OPC website. And so we hope that's the case. And so it's a really pretty creative, very clean site that's engaging, that also gives people, and I heard you loud and clear, Secretary Blumenfeld, that they need actual opportunities of what they can do to actually make a difference. And so we do that in a creative way on that website as well. And so I'll leave it at that. If anyone's got any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Council members, any questions? If not, let's. Oh, sorry, Mike.
Yeah. Real quick, I just want to acknowledge and say thank you once again to Mark. Mark took the time to join a Zoom live class session at UC Santa Barbara that I teach on sustainability and innovation. Undergraduates in the environmental studies program, not all that familiar with the Ocean Protection Council or, let's say, public service in general. And Mark did just a terrific job of explaining what OPC does and introducing students to, I'll say, the notion of public service is that the great opportunities that are there. So thank you again, Mark.
Thanks, Professor Brown. I appreciate it.
Okay, next to Liz Whiteman, who serves as our science advisor and the director of the Ocean Science Trust.
Thank you, Chair Crowfoot, council members. As always, great to be here with you today. Switching topics a little bit, I am so pleased to be able to use the Science Advisor update to be able to share with you all 2 new reports on our statewide marine protected area network that advance components of objectives 1 and 3 of the OPC strategic plan on climate resilience and protecting marine ecosystems, respectively. So released today, these reports are the product of a huge amount of work and collaboration on the part of 2 expert science working groups, Ocean Science Trust staff, OPC staff, and our partners at Fish and Wildlife and Fish and Game Commission. So one quick highlight note about each, with thanks to working group co-chairs, Dr. Madeline Hall-Arbour and Dr. Steve Murray, and all the working group members. The first report evaluating California's MPA network shares a socio-ecological framework to guide both the first and subsequent decadal evaluations of the network. It's worth highlighting, I think, a key recommendation from that expert group to develop monitoring and research to understand the economic, social, and cultural outcomes of the MPAs, lifting these to the investment and attention that has long been paid to ecological outcomes. Turning to the companion report, Climate Resilience in California's MPA Network. This is a cutting edge and timely look at climate change impacts and future scenarios for the California current, and putting that alongside a description of potential mechanisms by which the MPAs can provide resilience to climate change, along with an analysis of the strength of current evidence for each. Based on that, the working group shares a roadmap for research that can guide our deeper understanding and recommend a set of science-based actions to best support a climate resilient network starting today. So thank you to the whole group, and especially to co-chairs Dr. Gretchen Hoffman and Dr. Elliot Hazen for their leadership and their own resilience in a turbulent year plus in conducting this work. So at this time, I did want to mention that these reports are dedicated to the memory of OPC staff member, Dr. Adrienne DeHood, under whose leadership these efforts began on a really, really strong path. I feel confident that working together, we have lived up to her vision for the work. So I'll keep this brief and just say in close that as co-chair of your science advisory team and on behalf of the full SAT and the Ocean Science Trust staff, we're very much looking forward to now lifting and sharing this work with state, national, and international audiences in the months to come. And just piggybacking off what Secretary Blumenfeld said at the beginning, I think, California's MPAs, as demonstrated by these recent reports, still play a very important role as a model in international conversations about climate adaptation and biodiversity protection. So thank you again to everybody who has been involved in this deep collaboration.
Thank you, Liz, for that and all your work. Any questions or comments for her report? Jared.
Just one super quick question, Liz. So, and maybe we can get back to this offline, but when we hear at the end about the update on offshore wind, are there things that the science advisory panel are thinking about doing? And maybe when Jordan presents on that, if there's anything that you wanted to add, just I get lots of questions about, and Wade, Secretary Crowfoot kind of teed up this issue of money in the budget that could help expedite. I don't know if there's a scientific element of study or analysis that you think would be appropriate for your organization.
Absolutely, and I'd be happy to delve into that further. I'll just note that, one of the key recommendations from the Climate Resilience and MPA Network report is around thinking about the MPAs as not magically siloed from everything else in the ocean, but ways that these management actions can work in tandem and work towards synergistic goals. And there's room for scientific guidance to underpin doing that, I think.
Cool, thank you.
Mark, did you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, it may be more appropriate for when Commissioner Diamond presents, but with the resources that are in the budget, if they indeed get signed, the determinations on what gaps need to be filled scientifically and how to fill them will be made by the CNRA agencies that have been working on this, which are the Coastal Commission, State Lands Commission, Fish and Wildlife, and the OPC. Just so Jared knows, but we're meeting once a week on this issue, just so you know.
That's great, and I think maybe the inferred suggestion is to make that inclusive and get the input from the Science Trust and others across state government. All right, let's save the rest for the discussion on offshore wind and move to our first action item, which is agenda item 4. This advances our strategic goal number 1, which is safeguarding coastal and marine ecosystems and communities in the face of climate change. And specifically, this is focused on minimize the causes and impacts of the acidification of the ocean and relatedly hypoxia. We have 2 items to consider here, really, 2 parts of the same item. So item 4 is, again, an action item, and it's our consideration of authorization to distribute funds to improve our understanding of ocean acidification and hypoxia vulnerability and impacts. And so for the first part of this presentation and this request for funding, I'll turn it over to our colleague, Kat.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot and council members. James or Holly, slides, please. Thank you. Okay, so I am Catherine Beheshti. I am one of the California Sea Grant Fellows with the Ocean Protection Council, and today I will be presenting a project to support a competitive solicitation for ocean acidification and hypoxia monitoring, research, and synthesis. And this competitive solicitation will utilize funds from Chapter 10 of Proposition 68. You'll hear next from Dr. Justine Kimball, who will present item 4B, which focuses on building collaboration and standardizing protocols around state priorities for biological monitoring across multiple long-term monitoring programs. Next slide, please. So just to review, the Proposition 68 is the California Drought, Water, Parks, Climate, Coastal Protection, and Outdoor Access for All Act of 2018, which was approved by voters in June of 2018. Chapter 10 of Proposition 68 allocates $21.2 million to the Ocean Protection Council for a competitive grant program for projects that assist coastal communities in adaptation to climate change, including impacts from ocean acidification and hypoxia. Next slide, please. So ocean acidification and hypoxia, or OAH, both relate to changing ocean chemistry due to climate change. And this is beyond natural variability, as scientists are seeing a clear trend of more acidified waters and less dissolved oxygen. The ocean absorbs about 1/4 of carbon dioxide emitted by humans each year. And when the ocean absorbs all this excess CO2, it becomes more acidic. This means that pH decreases, as shown here in the figure in the top right. Most people are familiar with acidity through the foods that they eat. So lemon juice has a lower pH and our taste receptors react to that and it tastes sour. And just like our taste buds are sensitive to pH, so are critters living in the ocean, the most vulnerable of which are shell-forming animals, including oysters, corals, and a wide variety of tiny juvenile animals and plankton. And these animals pull together chemical building blocks from the environment, and ocean acidification makes this process much more difficult. So new evidence has also suggested that ocean acidification impairs the sense of smell in salmon, impedes growth in herring and other critical prey species. And with respect to hypoxia, the state is concerned about range compression or shoaling for a wide array of species. And the California coast, which is shown here in the figure on the left, is particularly vulnerable to OAH due to natural processes such as upwelling, where colder, nutrient-rich, deep water, here shown in darker colors, rise toward the surface. And that layers on top of global climate change and local pollution sources, as shown in the bottom right. Next slide, please. So given the relevancy of OAH impacts to California, the California Ocean Acidification and Hypoxia Science Task Force was established through Assembly Bill 2139 and passed in September of 2016 to ensure that OPC decision-making and further action on the issue of OAH was supported by the best available science. And the report shown here on the right was a product of that task force. And so guided by this report, which is Exhibit B, the proposed solicitation for item 4A will utilize funds from Proposition 68 to address one or more of the following: spatial and temporal data gaps, status and trends of OAH, multi-stressors related to OAH, connections between chemical and biological monitoring, and improvements to OAH models and data accessibility. Next slide, please. And this solicitation will do so through a combination of monitoring, research, and/or synthesis projects. Next slide, please. So for monitoring projects, these are projects that must be in the ocean, and they must enhance connection between chemical and biological monitoring. They must also improve OAH models as decision support tools and/or strengthen continuity, quality, and/or integration of OAH monitoring programs across the California coast, and in so doing, address spatial and temporal disparities. Next slide, please. Great. So for research projects, these must make a direct connection between research findings and the interpretation of long-term monitoring efforts or other relevant management relevant applications. So such projects must also meet one or more of the following priorities. They either must quantify sensitivity and adaptive capacity of key species under realistic, dynamic OA exposure regimes within the context of multi-stressors from ocean warming to hypoxia, and/or utilize OA and other environmental exposure gradients to assess ecological sensitivity and resilience and identify and test predicted ecological impacts using field studies or an ecosystem modeling framework. Next slide. Lastly, for synthesis projects, these must support the development of shareable information products, synthesizing OAH data from ongoing and past efforts, and/or support the development of a centralized data portal for submitting and accessing OAH chemical and biological data with associated metadata. Next slide, please. So if approved by council, the request for proposals, or RFPs, will be released in July of this year. In August, OPC will host a webinar and/or hold office hours. Letters of intent will also be due in August, and full proposals will be due in September. Selected projects will be brought to the December council meeting for consideration for funding, and projects will begin as early as February of next year. Next slide, please. So given the strong overlap between the Ocean Protection Council and California Sea Grant's strategic plans and priorities, the proposed joint solicitation leverages our existing and growing partnership. And shown here are the two strategic plans. Next slide, please. Thus, the Ocean Protection Council recommends the disbursement of $2 million to California Sea Grant to fund and administer statewide ocean acidification and hypoxia research and monitoring projects that will ultimately provide state resource management agencies and local jurisdictions with the data necessary to protect marine biodiversity and water quality, advance coastal adaptation efforts, and support climate-ready fisheries. California Sea Grant will contribute up to $400,000 to the competitive solicitation call. And this particular solicitation will address OPC strategic plan objectives 1.2 to minimize causes and impacts of OAH, and 1.3 to improve understanding of climate impacts on California's coast and oceans. Next slide, please. Thank you for your time, and I will now turn it over to Dr. Justine Kimball, who is our OPC Senior Scientist and lead of the Climate Change Program, to present on item 4B.
Thanks so much, Kat. Justine, we
Oh,
see you. There you
Yeah,
go.
sorry.
No worries.
Thanks, Kat, for teeing up. I was waiting for the slides to come up. Thanks, Secretary Kofra and council members, and thanks again, Kat, for teeing me up so well. The two projects are in coordination, as she mentioned, and I'll just be taking a deeper dive into the monitoring piece. The image that you can see here is of pteropods or sea snails, also known as sea butterflies, because their foot has been modified into a pair of wings. They are an important component of our zooplankton and food web, and you'll be hearing more about them as part of this project. Next slide. So you saw that task force report that Kat had in her slides, and this project is also in direct response to those recommendations in that report that was released last year. And the first recommendation of that report was, in fact, to better connect chemical and biological monitoring. OAH is a problem because it impacts marine life. You heard about some of those impacts from Kat, but I'll just reiterate that some of the most sensitive species are the ones that form shells of calcium carbonate, including juvenile animals and plankton that serve as food for others, such as pteropods. And yet most of the monitoring in the field has focused on the chemistry, so tracking the patterns of change in the increase of ocean acidification and hypoxia globally and locally. For the biology, lab-based experiments have been the norm. These experiments have been really valuable for understanding the sensitivity and the thresholds of marine species to chemistry. You can see these images here from a well-known experiment that show the effects of end-of-century acidification values on pteropod shells at different treatment lengths. You can see the longer treatment lengths are actually dissolving the shells of the pteropods there. However, how these impacts transfer and are reflected in the real world is a different question. And so that's why this sort of monitoring that pairs the chemistry with the biology is really just absolutely critical. And yet, unfortunately, it's not very common. We're really missing these important time series of change in the biology. So with this project, we hope to catalyze these paired measurements across existing monitoring efforts as recommended by the task force last year. Next slide. And that recommendation to better connect the biology and the chemistry was very specific in terms of leveraging ongoing monitoring efforts. Monitoring is really expensive in the field. The ship time is really expensive. The staffing, the equipment is all really expensive. So the task force had targeted ongoing programs that are already collecting the chemistry to enhance those programs to collect more biologically relevant data series. So you can see the 5 programs that were identified here, and you can see their sampling grids on the map there. So the NOAA West Coast OA cruise, as the name implies, a West Coast cruise supported by NOAA. The Access cruise is a collaboration between Point Blue and the NOAA sanctuaries. Cow Coffee and LTR are shown on the same sampling grid. They are programs out of Scripps, and the bite monitoring program is through SCORP and focused in the bite, again, as the name implies. And then Senkus is our partner on the data management side. They're not a field monitoring program per se in the same way, but they are really supporting on all the centralized data wrangling and reporting overarching across all the monitoring programs. And you can find additional details on all these programs in the staff rec and online. Next slide. But we had one additional step to take before we could start diving into projects, because the task force recommendation was actually pretty vague. It was, better connect biology and chemistry, but it didn't give specifics around what species or what measurements are, really the most promising to look at. So that's where another expert panel came in. And Francis and Jim are members of our OAH Science Task Force, and Sue and Jan were targeted because of their particular expertise in this area. And this set of projects really wouldn't have been possible without their effort over a really compressed timeline over this last winter and spring, and support from OST and convening. They came up with a really thorough and really thoughtful set of biological measurement recommendations that should be prioritized and looked at, given the criteria that we were considering. So, enhancing those particular ongoing programs. So these are the 5 recommendations that they provided, and their report is an exhibit as well. So looking at the extent of pteropod and crab and shell dissolution, looking at HABs assemblage information, eDNA, zooplankton, ichthyoplankton assemblage, and krill and forage fish abundances. Next slide. So using those recommendations as the starting point, a series of projects across the monitoring programs emerged, and that's what I'm presenting here to you today for consideration. The overarching goals and activities of this set of projects are listed here, and include the development of standardized protocols and best practices for chemistry and pteropod and larval crab sampling and analysis across the programs, the adoption and collection of standardized pteropod and larval crab sampling and analysis for up to 3 years, depending on the frequency of sampling for a given program, coordination and protocol development for collection of HABs and eDNA, data management, aggregation, curation, with the ultimate goal of interoperability of data sets and public access to data, and then overall coordination across the programs on synthesis and interpretation to support management relevant information. And so you can see that, not all of the recommendations from the expert panel are being addressed. That was really beyond the funding scope that we could do, but we took a really big step here with this set of projects. And next slide. So to conclude and to recap, this is a figure here from Nina Benarsik's recent paper that found really alarming impacts to juvenile Dungeness crab shells and sensory organs in field collected specimens much earlier than scientists were predicting. And this is the sort of critical information that we hope to support from this project, as well as that enhanced coordination, collaboration, data interoperability, and regional synthesis that really can get us to that network goal of the monitoring programs, both across California and then ultimately, West Coast wide. Next slide. So with that, the recommendation here before the council is for 1.68 million to support this set of projects. We have 3 grantees because we were able to consolidate a few of the programs within a single grantee. So SENCUS and Access are combined, and SWRP and NOAA are combined into single grantees. And so that's why you see 3 grantees, even though there are more programs that were addressed in this project or set of projects. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Justine, and thank you, Kat. That's helpful information on a very complex topic, but obviously really important as we build our scientific understanding of how climate change is impacting the ocean. And so questions from the council on these proposed actions and specifically funding these proposed activities. Mark, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. I just wanted to emphasize, because I think it's important, for Secretary Blumenfeld to know, we've been working on these issues very, very closely with the State Water Resources Control Board. So I just wanted to let you know that degree of coordination it's literally on a weekly basis on a wide variety of different issues, including these funding measures, as well as all the modeling that's going on right now. So I thought you'd want to know that.
Thanks so much, Mark. Jared, Secretary.
Super appreciate that, Mark, and thanks to Kat and Justine for those excellent presentations. I guess two questions. One is just, it's great to be a leader in California, but I guess the question is, it would appear that there would be, under the IPCC or within a global context, like, is there maybe just a minute on like how this fits into other research in other places, either globally or on the Pacific Rim? And then the second question is kind of just funding opportunities. I noticed that we're funding the federal government, NOAA here, but just with the raft of different stimulus and other science funding at the federal level, is there an opportunity for us to get additional funding from the feds rather than, I think it's great that we're funding NOAA and I have no objection to it, but it just feels like in the current context of federal scientific research budgets going up, there might be an opportunity for us to get some of that funding. So those are the two questions, kind of how this fits into the global research, and really just a 1 or 2 minute answer. Just, I guess the way I'd love to know is like that we're not going it alone, like this fits into a global research agenda, and everyone kind of knows what they're doing. So I'll end on that.
I can take a stab at that. I will say that it's definitely well coordinated with the national efforts. We at OPC are part of the Pacific Coast Collaborative Ocean Acidification Working Group. And so we are in close communication with the governments of British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon on all of this work. We were also in coordination with the NOAA Ocean Acidification Program Headquarters Office as part of the scoping of this effort. They are really focused on this biological monitoring piece, but we're really, at the forefront right here with what we're doing. And that became really clear as we were scoping these projects. So they have a series of like internal webinars right now on this exact topic on what biological measurements and indicators should really be prioritized and should be the focus in terms of OAH attribution. And me and the project team will be giving an update at the next webinar in July for that. And that's all with the NOAA internal PIs. We are leveraging the NOAA funding through the WCOA, the West Coast OA Cruise, which is West Coast wide. And so in that sense, it will be part of a West Coast wide data set. But they are limited in funding, and they weren't able to fund all of the analysis piece and the regional synthesis piece. So what we're funding, we're not directly funding NOAA. We're funding, some coordinated partner scientists like Nina Benarsek, who are going to be taking a look at the NOAA data through the California lens, but also looking at that whole regional West Coast lens. So I will say it's really well coordinated with all the work that's happening on the West Coast. Internationally, I'm just not as clear on that. But I know that there are efforts for standardization, but it really depends. You have to sort of be regional because it depends what species and all that are in your region. On the federal funding side, I know that NOAA Ocean Acidification Program, and they're the big players really in all of this, recently went through a program review and got some feedback that they had invested heavily on the West Coast throughout their history. And so they are, I think, taking a look at other regions like the Gulf Coast and territories and islands for next funding rounds, but I am in really close coordination with them. I used to work closely with them in my last job at NOAA. So certainly we're going to be working really closely with them on next steps.
Cool, that was super helpful. I guess Mark and Wade, and Justine and Kat, just feels like the more we spend time in these international arenas, whether it's the Convention on Biological Diversity or the COP, like California and you all are playing a global leadership role on this issue. And it might be worth subnationally kind of convening an international symposium on this, where OPC is the lead, and we're thinking about kind of our global role in doing this, because it just looking at the the world out there. This is a big, big, big issue, and it doesn't seem like anyone's more advanced than we are in terms of commitment to research, and just seems like be an interesting opportunity in the year ahead to think about how we could do that. But just food for thought.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And there's some good foundation to build on to deepen this sort of international discussion on ocean acidification. There was a group of subnationals and countries that actually came together on ocean acidification a couple of cycles during the Conference of Parties on Climate Change ago. And some of the key organizers of the work through the Pacific Coast Collaborative were spearheading this. And it included countries including, I recall, Chile and a whole bunch of countries come to mind. But in any event, point well taken, Jared, which is developing some type of symposia opportunity to share what we're learning about in California and learn from others as well. Mark.
Yeah, just to add to that, and I know this is really strictly the scientific community, but there was the big World Oceans Conference in San Diego last year, and there was a big focus on ocean acidification where California and Oregon and Washington really played the lead and in convening, and actually had special sessions on that Justine actually helped lead. And so I'm not saying that's going as far as we need to, Secretary Blumenfeld, because we definitely need to. It's such a critical and important issue. But it is something that in the scientific community is happening. But how do we elevate that effectively to decision makers? I think that would be a good offline discussion to try to figure out the best way to do that in an effective way. So we look forward to that. One last thing is, in the herding cats department, I just really want to highlight how difficult an endeavor it was for Justine and Kat to get all of those different agencies to work together under a fixed budget and come up with a monitoring program for the entire state of California. If you've ever tried to do something like that, it's like next to impossible, and these guys pulled it off. And I just want to give them major props for doing it. And it really just fills such an enormous scientific gap for the state of California in a very cost-effective way. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike.
Yeah, real quick. Thank you, Justine and Kat, for the presentation. Justine, you mentioned that there can only cover so much. There's some gaps. Do you guys have a plan for how critical is it to fill those gaps? What kind of time frame? Do you have a plan for how you might fill? And maybe it's connected to Secretary Blumenfeld's comment. Can those gaps be filled by partnering or whatever with some other folks who might provide supplemental funding?
Yeah, I mean, I think we would always hope for, outside supplemental funding. The report now recommendations is out there and public. And so I think that gives a lot of support for additional funding. I should note that, it is a potential part of the competitive solicitation as well, to better connect chemical and biological funding. So, that will be through an external competitive process, but it is possible that complementary and projects could fill those gaps there. I know that our NOAA colleagues are bringing this up to the headquarters office, that these are, continuing gaps that are there, but have been put forward as priorities for biological measurements. I think they are really important. We're focused on the bottom of the food web here, the pteropod and the larval crab from multiple ends of the food web, but those gaps are at the higher trophic levels, and I think those are really important pieces to capture. So yeah, I do think it's really important, but we hope that with this big first step that we can catalyze additional funding and support and focus going forward.
Great, thanks so much. So I want to invite public comment on this item, and would ask our colleagues from staff to call on members of the public to provide public comment.
Thank you, Chair Crowfoot. It looks like we have 4 hands raised, and just a clarification from earlier, if you've called in and you want to raise your hand, it's #2 for this meeting. So if you haven't raised your hand already, that is how you can do so. Our first 3 public comments are going to be coming from Emily Parker, Richard Sadowski, and Sean Bothwell. Emily Parker, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to speak. And it looks like you need to unmute. There you go.
All right, can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Great, thank you, and good afternoon, council members. My name is Emily Parker. I'm the coastal and marine scientist with Heal the Bay. We're an environmental nonprofit organization based on the traditional lands of the Tongva and Chumash people, also known as Santa Monica. Heal the Bay strongly supports staff's recommendation today for a funding disbursement to both USCC grant for ocean acidification and hypoxia research and monitoring projects, and also to the Scripps Institution of Oceanography to fund the California Ocean Observing System. As close working partners with USCC grant and as an alumni myself of the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, I'm deeply familiar with the critical importance of the work that both of these programs conducts. And we are very confident that this disbursement of funding will yield invaluable information on the chemical, ecological, and biological impacts of acidifying ocean waters and decreasing oxygen levels. OAH and ocean deoxygenation are very complex processes, and information on the biological impacts of these processes is constantly changing. And so we need strong coordination across all monitoring efforts to best understand how our marine resources are being impacted by these physiological changes. Research and monitoring is only the first step, and we're very glad to see that both OPC and USCC grant will be coordinating with the State Water Board on these projects. The outcomes of these monitoring projects should be intentionally aimed for action items that can be taken to mitigate the impacts of OAH on our oceans, such as informing the water quality standards and regulations at the Water Board. Heal the Bay wholeheartedly supports this funding disbursement, and we're looking forward to exploring our own OAH project proposals to contribute to a strong and coordinated OAH monitoring effort across the California coast. I'd like to thank the council and staff for focusing on this critical ocean health issue, and thank you very much for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Emily.
Our next speaker is going to be Richard Sadowski, followed by Sean Bothwell. Richard, you now have the floor.
Richard Sadowski. You there? Okay. Richard Sadowski from Homefront Environmental Justice, Morro Bay. We support the OPC on this issue with ocean acidification and hypoxia. Kind of just want to add another, data gap that we should, that needs to be considered is the accelerated rise in atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. Recently, the Keeling curve was updated, and which has measured the atmospheric carbon dioxide since 1958 on Mount Mauna Lea. In the last 2 years, we have gone up 10 points, which is 10 parts per million. We're at level at 420. Previous years, it was since this millennium started, it was been that rate was 4 years that it's taken. So, one of the things that I'm hopeful is that that some of that grant funding will go to help finance some citizen science work. For instance, we've been doing carbon dioxide monitoring around the Morro Bay estuary for the last year, and our averages around the estuary after the year were 453 or 456 parts per million. So one of the things, and we've been collaborating with Cal Poly University of San Luis, but that's one of the data gaps that I think that the OPC needs to look at is the have a coastal air monitoring program that links it with the ocean acidification and have that three-prong approach in dealing with land, sea, and air. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
And our next speaker is going to be Sean Bothwell. Sean, you now have the floor.
Good afternoon, Chair Crowfoot and council members. My name is Sean Bothwell, Executive Director for California Coastkeeper Alliance. I want to start by stating our strong support for OPC's investment in research and monitoring to better understand California's vulnerabilities to ocean acidification and hypoxia. Over the last several years, California Coastkeepers really championed the use of the Clean Water Act as a tool to prevent OAH hotspots and to minimize acidification impacts. We are a member of the Science Advisory Group for the Southern California Bight OA modeling project, and we've been strongly urging the State Water Board to begin development of a water quality standard to address OAH. We're here today to support this funding because California needs the best available data to legally and scientifically justify the management decisions that California is going to need to start making to protect our oceans from OAH. While this funding for research is critical, I also want to urge the state to start looking towards actions we can take now to prevent OAH hotspots from occurring due to land-based sources of pollution. Those include from wastewater facilities, stormwater runoff, and agricultural runoff. Most importantly is for the State Water Board to start that regulatory package for developing an OAH water quality objective. But there's also other no regret strategies the state can start doing now while we continue our research and monitoring of OAH. First, we need to continue encouraging potable reuse along our coast so that we can achieve OPC's strategic plan target 1, 2, 3 to recycle 90% of our wastewater for beneficial use. Second, we need to start holding stormwater permittees accountable for meeting their water quality standards while not deeming polluters in compliance when they're not in compliance with their standards. Also, in the context of stormwater, we need to develop new water quality protections for MPAs so that they can act as hope spots in the face of climate change. This is also OPC strategic plan target 341. And finally, we need to require enforceable timelines and milestones for agricultural operations to prevent nutrient runoff in our oceans. These are all no regret strategies that are already required by the law or identified by the OPC strategic plan. So we urge the state to start taking these actions now to minimize OA hotspots. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Our last speaker is going to be Leslie Handa. Leslie, you have the floor.
Hello. Hello, OPC council members and the general public. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Leslie Handa from the San Diego Audubon Society Conservation Committee and Handa Ornithology Lab. Today I'm speaking on behalf of the Audubon Advocate Group, the Eelgrass Advocates at the San Diego Audubon Society for members Sri Kanda Hadai, Lance Dawson, Damian Herlevic, Padma Janathan, and Deanne Roldan, who could not attend this meeting today. We're thrilled to hear of your goal to protect 15,000 acres of seagrass beds and to create an additional 1,000 acres by 2025. There are a few relevant areas where the OPC can make a meaningful difference. First, the standardization of methods of eelgrass restoration and monitoring, which has been recommended by the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission. Standardization would provide appropriate parameters for the scientific community, which would assist with comparing the success of different restoration projects and would help support decision makers with information for management decisions. Second, as the OPC is well positioned to communicate this science widely and bring different efforts together to provide California with the best picture of the dynamic eelgrass beds along our coast, consolidation and publishing data on previous restoration efforts would be helpful. Finally, as eelgrass requires shallow waters for photosynthesis, sea level rise can harm eelgrass beds, and we request the OPC to fund efforts to research sea level rise impacts on seagrass and plan for any necessary mitigation. Thank you for all your work in protecting our waters and for making ocean acidification amelioration a key priority. Thank you.
And it looks like we had, sorry, one more hand go up. Once Leslie starts speaking, we have Shauna O. Shauna, you have the floor.
Thank you. My name is Shauna O, and good afternoon, Secretary and members of the Council. I direct the California Sea Grant College Program, which is based at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And I just wanted to remind the Council members that Sea Grant is a federal state university partnership funded by NOAA at 33 university programs in every coastal and Great Lakes state, including Puerto Rico and Guam. And as you heard today, as different programs were mentioned, I want to remind everyone that California has two Sea Grant programs, one based at University of Southern California at USC, and the other, which is headquartered at Scripps Institute in Oceanography. And I direct the latter, the California Sea Grant Program. And we administer competitive grant programs with processes for evaluating, prioritizing, and conducting grant management activities to advance research related to ocean and coastal resources. And Sea Grant has worked with is a partner with OPC since inception, to engage the larger scientific community in California and to implement research projects to inform the management of ocean resources. And I wanted to just clarify again, since council member Blumenfeld has mentioned, NOAA is in fact contributing $400,000 to the RFP, the briefing that you heard from CAB, and specifically this plan solicitation will meet our program's strategic plan for healthy coastal ecosystem to support research to understand the drivers and impacts of environmental change and anthropogenic impacts and stressors on coastal and marine species, ecosystems and environments such as sea level rise, rising temperature, ocean acidification, and increasing hypoxia. We thank you so much for the opportunity to partner again with the Ocean Protection Council, and we look forward to working with Kat and Justine to implement this research call. Thank you.
Thank you, Shauna. Any other public comment that we have at this point?
That is all the public comment for now.
All right, good. We of course have an option for any council member to share any other thoughts or raise questions or move that we take action on these items.
I move we adopt the resolution as proposed.
I second.
Excellent. And just to state this, our attorneys are, Mike, I'm going to just make sure that you support the following motion. Move to adopt the proposed findings for all projects as recommended by staff, approve the projects as described, and delegate to Director Gold the authority to implement the council's approval.
So move.
Great. With a second from Secretary Blumenfeld. Excellent. Let's go for the quick roll call.
Secretary Blumenfeld.
Aye.
Councilmember Dumlau.
Aye.
Councilmember Diamond.
Aye.
Councilmember Brown.
Aye.
And Secretary Crowfoot.
Aye.
Thank you.
Great. Really excited for those projects to move forward. Our next item on the agenda is item number 5. And this advances our strategic plan goal 3, which is to enhance coastal and marine biodiversity, and specifically to support sustainable marine fisheries and thriving fish and wildlife populations. And this is also an action item, and we will consider authorizing to disperse funds to reduce the risk of whale and sea turtle entanglement in fishing gear. And here to present this item is our colleague, Lindsay. And as Lindsay comes on screen, James, I would imagine she'll have a PowerPoint presentation. So if you could bring that up as well. Okay, we have got that. Lindsay, if you are talking or trying to get in, you are muted at this point. Oh, I see your screen. Are you able to talk, Lindsay?
Hi, I'm sorry, my internet just dropped out. So
no worries, you are on and we can hear you.
Great, thanks. Good afternoon, Chair Crowfoot and members of the council. I'm Lindsay Benito, the MPA Program Manager at OPC, and I'm excited to share 3 projects that will advance entanglement science and reduce the risk of whale and sea turtle entanglement in fishing gear. Before we jump in, I'd like to remind the council that the 2018 budget included $7.5 million to OPC to reduce the risk of whale and sea turtle entanglements. To date, OPC has made $5.5 million in investments. I'll share more about the details in a few moments, but this includes the council's previous approval for a $2 million competitive call from last June's meeting. The projects I'm sharing with you today are a result of that previously approved competitive call. Next slide, please. As you all know, entanglement of marine life became a serious issue during the 2014-2015 fishing season along the West Coast. Reports of humpback, gray, and blue whale entanglements reached an all-time high in 2016, prompting a coast-wide response to address the issue. It's important to note that while about 50% of entanglements are of unknown origin, of the gear identified, the majority of entanglement reports involve commercial Dungeness crab fisheries in California, Washington, and Oregon. Next slide. As a part of California's response to this emergency, OPC adopted the entanglement strategy in 2019, which outlines investment priorities to reduce the entanglement risk. The strategy focuses on a holistic approach to reduce the risk of entanglement through advancing collaborative partnerships, best available science, gear innovation, and response and outreach. Next slide. Through the Dungeness Crab Working Group, which was convened in 2015, risk factors such as forage patterns, fishery dynamics, whale and sea turtle population modeling, and oceanographic patterns were all identified as key elements to inform fishermen and managers in tracking, assessing, and mitigating entanglement risk through a variety of management measures. Next slide. Using this strategy, OPC has invested over $5.5 million to reduce entanglements along our coastline to date. Projects funded include those that enhance fisheries management to reduce interactions between whales and fishing gear, projects that better track fishing activity, and those that innovate fishing gear to avoid entanglement, and projects that improve response to marine life entanglements once they occur. As you might have heard, there is some good news from the proposed state budget, as it includes $1.3 million to CDFW to fully implement the drift gillnet transition program and completely phase out that harmful gear from our coastal waters. OPC staff are working closely with CDFW to facilitate this additional funding for drift gillnet buyout. As I mentioned earlier, one project approved by our council last June included the development of a competitive grant program to reduce entanglement risk. This was awarded to Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission. Next slide. Building on research priorities identified in the entanglement strategy and a recent entanglement science workshop led by our partners at the Nature Conservancy, OPC awarded Pacific States up to $2 million to fund and administer projects identified through a competitive process to reduce the risk of entanglement in California fishing gear. The solicitation called for projects that would improve observational data stream and refine models, perform analyses to inform current management, improve socioeconomic science to evaluate mitigation strategies, and advance risk assessment and decision support tools. Next slide. Pacific States developed a request for proposals in close collaboration with OPC staff, which was released on February 8th. A review panel of researchers with expertise in entanglement science, whale biology and ecology, socioeconomics, and fisheries management, as well as resource managers from state and federal agencies and commercial fishers, evaluated submitted proposals. CDFW staff were an integral part of this process. The 3 projects I'm presenting to you today were selected through a competitive process in close partnership with OPC staff and consultation with the review panel. Next slide. The first project will provide up to just under $600,000 to the Farallon Institute to enhance and integrate whale distribution data to reduce entanglement risk. This project will synthesize observational data and models to predict the distribution of prey and whales within fishing grounds across the state. It will also provide near real-time ecosystem and economic data on species distributions through an easy-to-use decision support tool, which will help assess entanglement risk and economic hardships for crab fisheries. Next slide. The second project will fund Cascadia Research Collective up to just under $500,000 to provide real-time whale observations and validate models to assess entanglement risk. For this project, Cascadia will provide real-time distribution of whales to evaluate presence and risk. They'll be evaluating the level of underreporting and bias in entanglement reports And finally, they'll be validating and testing models on whale presence and risk. Next slide. Lastly, Upwell Turtles will receive up to just over $550,000 to monitor leatherback turtle distribution and migration to reduce entanglement risk. Upwell Turtles will be comparing leatherback movements and behavior to both crab and swordfish fisheries. They'll be refining the turtle model in EcoCast to identify potential areas of turtle presence. And they'll be providing turtle distribution and abundance to fisheries managers to support decision-making. Next slide. Under the guidance of OPC and Pacific States, these efforts will be highly collaborative in developing scientific consensus and utilizing new and existing data streams to enhance species models. These projects will provide much needed information for state managers as they consider strategies to both sustain fishing and prevent marine life entanglement. Through past efforts in these proposed projects, the goal is to have refined whale and integrated risk assessment models by 2024 that can be periodically updated with observational data to further improve our understanding of risk. Next slide. Thank you for your time and consideration of these projects.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. I thought we could move to public comment first before we entertain questions or thoughts from council members. So let's go ahead and move to public comment at this time. Holly, do we have folks that have queued up?
We do. So first it's going to be Craig Schumann, followed by Peggy Stapp. Craig, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Great. Secretary Crowfoot, members of the council, I'm Craig Schumann, Marine Region Manager with California Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'd like to thank the Ocean Protection Council for your partnership and continued support of our collective efforts to reduce the risk of whale and sea turtle entanglement in California fishing gear. The projects before you today will support continued implementation and refinement of the risk assessment mitigation program, which has moved from the pilot phase to implementation under a regulatory program, and help advance our collective partnerships to manage entanglement risk in California. Also, as Lindsay pointed out, we are looking at proposed funding in the governor's budget to complete the drift gillnet buyout program. And later this year, the Fish and Game Commission will be considering action on a petition to list Pacific leatherback sea turtle as an endangered species under the California Endangered Species Act. Thank you.
Next speaker is going to be Peggy Stapp, followed by Emily Parker. Peggy, you have the floor.
Hi, I'm Peggy Stapp, and I'm with Marine Life Studies and the Whale Entanglement Team located down in the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. Question, you had mentioned that there was $2 million of the OPC funds sent up for the competitive process, and just around a little over 1.5 million is for these 3 projects. What happened to the rest of the money? Where did that go? I was curious.
So what we'll do is we'll take that as a question within your public comment, and then we'll work to answer that when public comment is completed.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that'll be great. And so from what I understand that when they looked at the different proposals that were sent in for the competitive process, you were really just looking for data streams. You weren't really looking for mitigation of entanglements themselves. Is that what, from my understanding? Because I didn't realize that when we had applied. I was just curious, that's really kind of what you were looking for that?
So Peggy, just because the way we generally do public comment is sort of get the comments and then answer them in our discussion. So what I'm going to make sure that we answer is the questions you're raising around exactly what were sort of eligible projects and how we selected them. So at the end of public comment, I'll ask Lindsay to talk about that.
Okay, thank you very much for your time.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Next speaker is going to be Emily Parker, followed by Kathy George. Emily, you have the floor.
Good afternoon again, council members. This is Emily Parker with Heal the Bay. Heal the Bay would like to express strong support for today's disbursement of funding to reduce whale and sea turtle entanglement in fishing gear in California. And I'm going to keep my comments relatively brief this morning and just echo other comments of support that you have and will hear this afternoon. And I'd also like to briefly encourage the recipients of this funding disbursement to work in close coordination with project managers from the previously funded projects on this issue. $5.5 million have already been given to some really incredible projects, in particular the Dungeness Crab Working Group, which has already conducted a great deal of really critical work on the development of alternative gear to reduce marine mammal and turtle entanglements. And they've done so in collaboration with California anglers, which is really critical. We're very much looking forward to see the outcomes of this research. And again, I'd like to thank the council for prioritizing this issue. Thank you.
Next speaker is going to be Kathy George, followed by Emily Jeffers. Kathy, you have the floor.
Thank you. Hello, Secretary Crowfoot and council members. My name is Kathy George, and I'm the Director of Field Operations and Response at the Marine Mammal Center. I am also a member of the California Dungeness Crab Fishing Gear Working Group and Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary Advisory Council. The Marine Mammal Center fully supports OPC's commitment to advancing ocean conservation statewide, especially with projects protecting whales and sea turtles here in California. I am here to share our support for all the projects in Action Item 5, especially 5B. The Marine Mammal Center is an active participant in the project, and we provided a letter of support. The surveys themselves provide critical information about marine life concentrations to the Department of Fish and Wildlife and will validate models to assess entanglement risk. Additionally, the surveys merge response with research and allow for real-time entanglement response by expert responders. Thank you to each of the council members for their consideration of this request, and thank you to Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission and Lindsay for all of their critical work. It's a great pleasure to work on 3 OPC-funded projects: solar loggers, large whale and turtle entanglement response network support, and vessel surveys. Thank you for your time and have a great day.
Thank you. Our next speaker is going to be Emily Jeffers, followed by Sandy Ailsworth. Emily, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you for taking my comment. My name is Emily Jeffers. I'm a staff attorney at the Center for Biological Diversity. I'd like to voice the center's support for Action Item 5 and the council's effort to reduce the risk of whale and turtle entanglement in fishing gear. I would like to especially emphasize the need for ropeless gear in the Dungeness crab fishery. And we want to encourage the council to, if there's a way to fund studies to show the efficacy of ropeless gear in order to prove up to the industry that this is really a viable technology and that it's something that California can be a leader in, and we think it's the technology of the future. And so we encourage the council to fund studies that go towards that effort. Thank you very much.
Our last speaker is going to be Sandy Ailsworth. Sandy, you have the floor. Sandy, you're muted still.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Again, apologies. Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot and members of the council. I am Sandy Ailsworth, and I'm a senior oceans advocate for NRDC. And I also wanted to comment on agenda item 5. NRDC is very appreciative that ending entanglement of California's marine life has been a top priority for OPC. We strongly support the 3 projects described that are being considered right now, and we apologies. In our view, the 3 projects that are well integrated, so are deserving of full funding, and will collectively advance our scientific understanding, leading to improved management measures to address entanglement. In addition, the funding that OPC has dedicated toward advancing pop-up gear to date, including extending its financial support for the National Marine Sanctuaries Foundation Gear Innovations Testing Project, is absolutely vital to achieving an enduring solution to marine life entanglements.
And the lessons learned here in California will inform national and international efforts to advance this technology. These projects are just the beginning, however, and we hope that OPC will take a long-term view and provide sustained funding for advancing pop-up gear in California, and will also consider allocating resources for other critical work that needs to be undertaken for pop-up gear to be commercially deployed, including having virtual gear marking. Thank you, and apologies again for my technical difficulties.
And that is the last of our public comment.
Thanks so much. Lindsay, one of the public commenters, or maybe Mark, asked a question just regarding the focus of the funding. And as I understand it, it was focused on data and modeling as it relates to whale entanglement, and less focused on, for example, direct action to protect the animals, which is, of course, is important, but wasn't the focus of this funding. Lindsay or Mark, do you want to just elaborate or confirm that?
Yeah, I'll start, and Lindsay, please jump in when I mess up, which I probably will. You know, the recommendations on how to proceed, we're really working with the industry, and just wanted to make sure that the people understood that. And so really the focus was on enhancing the data that we do have on presence and absence of whales as well as sea turtles, and really enhancing also the modeling that we have so that it's much more effective as predictive modeling, and in the hopes that by the end of this whole process, we'll really be able to say at any given time with relatively high certainty where whales may be and sea turtles may be off our coast. And so that was really the focus, as opposed to the sort of work that, for example, the Marine Mammal Center does directly in actually rescuing whales, and so many other groups do in rescuing whales and marine mammals that are entangled. So that was absolutely not part of the call. And as such, in this very in our peer review process with multiple different agencies and scientists, those sorts of proposals, of which there were only one, scored quite poorly in comparison to the top three. So that's that. The other thing is the woman from Center for Biological Diversity had referred to ropeless gear investment, and I think, as you heard subsequently from NRDC, that of course we at the OPC have already invested in that research going on right now on gear innovation testing program, which includes ropeless gear. And to be quite honest, it's been a little bit of a challenge that was unforeseen, because there was an attempt to actually move forward with some legislation that led to some distrust in the fishing community. And so we're now trying to overcome that, because we really don't want to assume what the results of the study is before we actually do the study. And the legislation sort of put us in a little bit of a pickle there. But we're still working hard, Lindsay and others, to try to make sure that we can move forward with that study as soon as possible. It's just become more of a challenge than it was originally. Lindsay, is there anything you want to add to any of this?
No, you covered it pretty well. I would just refer back to the RFP. You can see that there was a clear link between management and assessing entanglement risk. And although Mark is exactly right, derelict gear is a problem, it's something that we weren't specifically looking to address in this particular RFP. That being said, with asking what the extra funds will be used for, those funds are actually, so there's the overarching $2 million, which includes administrative costs to specific states. And so that's where most of that extra money would be going to. And we still have just under $2 million remaining left to address whale and sea turtle mortality issues. So we can discuss this probably further down the line as well.
Thanks so much for all your work, Lindsay. Any comments or questions from members of the council? And if not, there is, would someone like to make a motion to approve funding for these projects?
I make a motion. Or Matthew, were you going to make a motion?
Go for it.
No, you go. You.
Sure. I move that the council adopt the findings outlined in the staff report, as well as the resolution in the staff report on page, is that 2?
Excellent. Is there a second?
Second.
Excellent. And can we call the roll?
Yes, Secretary Blumenfeld.
Yes.
Councilmember Dumlau.
Aye.
Councilmember Diamond.
Aye.
Councilmember Brown.
Aye.
And Secretary Crowfoot.
Aye.
Thank you all.
All right. We're going to move on to agenda item number 6, which is our discussion on offshore wind in California. And again, to link it to our strategic plan, this discussion advances goal number 4 of our strategic plan, supporting ocean health through a sustainable blue economy, and specifically guiding sustainable renewable energy projects. Now, in a moment, we'll ask Justine to present on this item, and we'll also welcome our California Energy Commission Commissioner Karen Douglas, who has been doing a lot of the work to advance the possibility of offshore wind. And many of us most likely are aware that recently the federal government and the state of California and the governor announced a landmark agreement and essentially a call for projects and creating a call area in federal waters, almost 400 square miles off the coast of California. Huge thanks to Commissioner Douglas, who was really the guiding light behind that effort for so many months and in fact years. And then, of course, our own Councilmember Jordan Diamond will both present on this item, and then I'll turn over the reins once she's done presenting to facilitate a discussion of our council and members of the public. So first to you, Justine.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot, and good afternoon again, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity here to tee up a discussion on offshore wind in California. Next slide. California's interest in pursuing offshore wind is primarily being driven by our ambitious renewable energy goals and milestone to reach carbon neutrality by 2045. To reach that goal, we are lucky to have really great wind resources. You can see here in the figure the wind patterns offshore. It's actually some of the best wind resources in the country that we have offshore, as well as access to other renewables like solar resources. But since the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, it's important to have complementary sources, and offshore wind has been identified as an important component of California's renewable energy portfolio because of this. Internationally, offshore wind is much further along in its popularity and deployment. Over 5,000 offshore wind turbines are active in Europe today, whereas in the US, currently we have 7 that exist on the East Coast. This is expected to change in the near future with projects on the East Coast that are in the works and support from the Biden administration of 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, the other 30 by 30, which is accelerating projects. And in California, we do have some history. In 2018, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, BOEM, did identify call areas. These are federal proposed locations for these sales off of northern and central regions of California. And recently, the focus has continued to be in these federal waters, not state waters, because potential impacts and conflicts are considered to be less in these further offshore waters. You'll be hearing more about this from Commissioner Douglas, but I'll just highlight that the new revised call area off the central coast in federal waters is the majority, roughly like 95% of the new call area is 20 to 30 miles offshore. However, these offshore waters are much deeper, and so that has some technological implications. Next slide. The first offshore wind farm, this was back in the 90s, was actually at a max depth of only 13 feet. So this has continued to increase over the years with turbines that are anchored to the seabed. These are the fixed design turbines up to around 160 feet, maybe a bit greater than that. And on the East Coast, the focus and projects have been on these fixed designs. deeper than around that 160 feet benchmark, floating technology must be used. Floating turbines was pioneered in 2009 in Norway, the Hywind turbine, and then in Scotland in 2017, the first fully farm offshore array came online, and then the largest array is planned to come online in Norway in 2022, and that's co-located with an oil and gas operation offshore. And then in this figure below, you'll clearly see the difference between the fixed and the floating designs. With some of the floating designs there, you can see the center design on the floating ones is the spar buoy, which was the original and design of the Hywind turbine and is continued to be a popular design, but advances in technology and engineering are happening constantly. So there isn't really a current preferred design for these turbines off of California. And the technical feasibility of deep water floating turbines really isn't questioned because these type of floating structures have been successfully demonstrated by the oil and gas industries for many decades. So it's really the expense, the transmission infrastructure, port and shipping requirements that are logistical barriers. Next slide. And in addition to the technological considerations, potential impacts to marine life, fisheries, tribal cultural resources, and local communities and economies also need to be evaluated. California does have a wealth of data information, but because offshore wind is new and a very specific consideration, additional data is likely going to be required. And then, of course, engagement with key stakeholders early and often will also be key. Next slide. So to address some of these planning considerations, OPC has previously funded projects. So some of these efforts I'd like to highlight here was a project to analyze the feasibility of offshore wind development in the North Coast region. This was led by Humboldt State University and the Schatz Energy Research Center, and those resources can be found online. Mapping the ocean fishing grounds west of the northern coast counties to define areas of importance to coastal fishing communities is an ongoing project and should be complete by the end of the year or early next year. And this is being led by the Humboldt Fishermen's Marketing Association. And then identifying offshore wind energy areas through least conflict modeling and incorporating the marine environment into existing online planning tools, including, you can see here, the California Offshore Wind Energy Gateway, which is a great resource for the whole community. And you'll be able to actually see there through the mapping tools that they're developing how different factors interact spatially. And this is being led by the Conservation Biological Institute. And then another project around specifically the call areas, the BOEM call areas that I mentioned before, is compiling and analyzing all the existing information on the marine environment related to those call areas. It's being led by Point Blue and is also ongoing and should be complete by the end of the year, as well as that least conflict analysis modeling. So this set of projects is really critical for highlighting knowledge gaps, as well as, for potential areas of additional investment and to support, planning in the steps forward. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Douglas.
Super. Well, thank you, Justine, and thanks for that great presentation. I am, let's see, am I coming through here?
You sure are.
Good. All right, good. I just wanted to be sure before I started talking. So as Justine noted, I'm a commissioner at the California Energy Commission and the state's lead point of contact for the BOEM California Offshore Renewable Energy Task Force. And as Secretary Crowfoot noted, I had a significant and ongoing role in facilitating and being part of the discussions between the state and the Department of Interior and Department of Defense. And, as we tried to chart a path forward for offshore wind in California. And that led to the recent announcement that was referenced. But anyway, I wanted to thank Secretary Crowfoot and the OPC members and also Mark Gold and Jordan Diamond for the invitation to provide a status update today. And I'll just build off of Justine's great introduction and provide some more detail on what's happening and next steps for us here in California. So if we could go to slide 2, please. Great. So this just provides some background for the issue in California. We've really been working on it for years, since 2016, when the first BOEM California Intergovernmental Task Force for Offshore Wind was convened. And there's been a significant amount of public outreach and engagement, including, but not limited to, tribal engagement from 2017 to the present. That engagement led to draft proposed call areas and an informal process that resulted in BOEM issuing a call for information and nominations for potential offshore wind areas in 2018. And things kind of came to a slowdown when the Department of Defense looked at those proposed areas and determined that the Central Coast call areas were not compatible with military activities. And so BOEM went ahead and finalized the call areas based on public comment, but the process really didn't continue in any significant way outside of public outreach and some exploration of other potential areas because of this incompatibility. So if you could go to the next slide, please. That really sets the state. Oh, this is what I just covered. So this is helpful because you can see that it's okay if you go back just for a moment. So the 3 call areas that were finalized are Humboldt Bay, the Humboldt Bay call area, which is the yellow area by Eureka. And then moving down, the brown area is the Morro Bay call area, and the kind of teal parallelogram there is the Diablo Canyon call area. So if you could go down or go to the next slide, please. So this is where we came to the discussions with Department of Defense, because they didn't really have concerns with the Humboldt Bay call area. They had substantial and continuing concerns with the Diablo Canyon call area. And so the area where we really focused discussion was the Morro Bay call area. And from the previous slide, that was the brown area. You can see it kind of hugs the edge of the Monterey Sanctuary there. And through the discussions that we had, it turned out that we were able to identify a 399 square mile area that includes 65%, so not all of the existing Morro Bay call area, and it includes new areas, and most of those areas actually extend to the west of the call area, and you can see the kind of darker maroon color, and so they actually push the proposed area further from shore. But the area that's highlighted in pink goes from 20 miles to 17 miles from shore. And so that's one that I'm sure will be the subject of a lot of comment and review. Under the assumptions that we use for technology and planning and allowing room for micrositing and allowing for the fact that there will probably need to be there will certainly need to be a shipping corridor and some other things accommodated in this area. The estimate is that this could accommodate 3 gigawatts or so of offshore wind. And so the next step on the Central Coast, and this will happen before the end of June, is for BOEM to publish a call for information, essentially a new call, and start a new comment period for the areas that you see in this picture that are outside of the original call area. So that pink area that's closer to shore and the kind of more maroon outline that's further from shore. All of the call areas, except for that pink area, is 20 miles or more from shore. So let's see here. If we could go to the next slide, please. All right, this is a very wordy slide, but that's okay. I'll try to cover it at a high level. So the Energy Commission has worked very closely with our state government partners, including the OPC, Coastal Commission, CDFW, and others for years. And so we've had a coordinating role here. And so one of the things that we are doing at the Energy Commission is convening a workshop. It's already been noticed on June 21st. And in that workshop, we're going to go over these next steps so that the public has the benefit of understanding just procedurally what's about to happen. So among these next steps, BOEM is going to start a new call for information for those areas that we just discussed. And the Humboldt call area would be treated as a wind energy area and looked at that way. And we are working towards a new task force meeting that will be held on July 13th, 2021. It was originally announced that it would be June 24th, but it had to be pushed back to avoid a conflict with the Pacific Fisheries Management Council. We're doing tribal outreach ahead of the task force meeting. So I've actually got a hard stop at 3:30. I doubt we'll run into that, but for a tribal meeting. So I think the one other thing I will say on this slide is that we're working very closely with BOEM to make the process work for California agencies and California stakeholders, while also keeping the overall process on track. If we could go to the next slide, please. All right, so as this issue approached, the agencies that have been working together, most of which are part of California Natural Resources Agency, put together a joint budget approach in order to make sure that we had the capacity to address offshore wind. And I wanted to, and we're really fortunate that the governor strongly supported this. And so the governor's office moved this into the budget. It looks, it got strong support from the legislature and was moved forward as a priority in the budget. And so it will provide us with the resources to do a lot of the science and the outreach work, and also to hire key staff for the permitting process and the environmental review process. So without a doubt, this issue is going to be a heavy lift for many of our agencies, and the budget proposal here will just be an extraordinary help for us. And so it's a $20 million total amount for offshore wind. Ocean Protection Council will administer a significant amount for environmental analysis and synthesis and of information. That will be done in coordination with the agencies working on offshore wind. The Energy Commission has been taking point on outreach with California Department of Fish and Wildlife, really taking the lead with the fishing industry. There's some port funding. We can talk more about this if the council's interested. And so I think there's one more slide. It's probably just a conclusion. There we go. So contact information for my advisors. They're both deeply involved in this. I just wanted to conclude by saying that offshore wind has huge potential to be very helpful for our energy system. I'm happy to talk about that for our climate goals. But establishing that industry here in California will take a coordinated approach, and it'll take a focused and really proactive approach to do what needs to be done to have the right level of outreach and environmental review, and to do it in a reasonable time frame. So we've got a great start here and great collaboration between agencies, and I just look forward and appreciate the discussion today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. And I think we're all, on behalf of Governor Newsom, really excited to explore and advance the potential of offshore wind on the coast. And of course, being the Natural Resources Agency, we want to make sure there is, adequate outreach and assessment to really understand questions and concerns and potential impacts that need to be minimized or mitigated, whether that's to commercial fisheries or, importantly, to biological habitat or tribal cultural resources. And so I know you're committed to that as well. And of course, part of the funding that we hope to collectively receive is going to allow us to do that engagement and assessment.
Yep.
So we all know Jordan as a colleague here on the Ocean Protection Council, but she also leads the Center for Law, Energy, and Environment at University of California, Berkeley. And I think in that capacity has led some important work on exploring the potential and bringing stakeholders together on offshore wind. So over to you, Jordan.
Thank you so much, Secretary Crowfoot, and thank you to Justine for your great opening and overview, and enormous thanks to Commissioner Douglas, who, as she said, has been leading the state's offshore wind discussions and analyses and planning for the last 5 years on her back, pulling things forward. So even when few realized that offshore wind was a possibility. I'm very happy the council is engaging in an in-depth discussion about this today. Since 2016, the question of whether there will eventually be offshore wind off of California's coast has circulated, but recent steps have brought kind of new urgency and attention to the push the up 30 by 30, the Biden administration's setting of a 30 gigawatt goal by 2030, along with California's leading climate goals, means that we're seeing a sense of urgency pushing towards renewable energy development generally and offshore wind especially. Offshore wind makes the news almost daily right now, and not just in the trade rags, but in the kind of mainstream news. And we've moved from almost hypothetical conversation about the possibility of having turbines offshore of California to specific call areas and the likelihood of auctioning the first set of leases next year, which is a pretty dramatic shift. To reiterate, the majority of offshore wind development that we're discussing is floating offshore wind located in federal waters, although there are a couple of proposals for platforms near shore in Southern California off of Lompoc. For the federal waters, as discussed, the proposals are generally located 20 plus miles offshore, and BOEM is the lead regulator. We're working extensively with the state over the last 5 years. I do want to say, Commissioner Douglas has been incredible as she's led the majority of state efforts related to offshore wind planning and development. And I would suggest in that vein that as the offshore wind conversation continues to expand and accelerate, my interest in really what we should do everything we can to support her and her team and the general kind of push towards a holistic conversation about offshore wind and what it can be in California. We need every renewable energy resource possible. As demonstrated by the recent SB 100 Joint Agency report, we know that we need to bring a daunting amount of renewable energy online to stay on pace to meet our 2045 carbon neutrality targets. Simultaneously, floating offshore wind, as Justine went over, is just emerging around the world, and there is much to learn about best practices and both short and long-term impacts. We're also deeply committed separately to enabling a just transition generally and ensuring the shift from an extractive to a regenerative economy is place-based and equitable. So this kind of the combination or this trifecta means that we have an opportunity to help set a standard both for the rest of the country and for the world. I think as Secretary Blumenfeld said earlier, that's what we do in California. And we're at the start of a new industry, which means we have an opportunity to help demonstrate that you can fight climate, ensure sustainability and environmental protection, promote equity, and have a healthy industry. But it's a heavy lift, and I think it'll take all hands on deck to make that happen. And we also need all hands on deck because, quite frankly, it's impossible to maximize across every dimension. There will be trade-offs as we move forward, and it's essential that these happen openly and transparently. I would highlight the public comments submitted by Tom Hafer, president of the Morro Bay Commercial Fishermen's Organization. I know there are others on the line today expressing concerns about the potential impacts. In the spirit of transparency, as Secretary Crowfoot mentioned, I do know that I have been working in grant-funded research through my center, through Berkeley's Center for Law, Energy, and Environment, on a report that outlines opportunities, challenges, and principles related to offshore wind development in California. I also facilitate some working groups related to offshore wind. The goal of the research report we recently released was to provide an overview and present some ideas for how the state can push forward with offshore land planning in a way to set a kind of a leading example for smart and equitable planning. Our work is informed by 2 stakeholder convenings, but it does not represent a comprehensive stakeholder review, nor does it necessarily reflect the views of the individual convening participants or reviewers. So I do want to be clear that my comments today are just offered purely in my individual capacity. But in sum, I'll emphasize that my focus has become kind of increasingly honed in on the questions of, first, how can we ensure the most inclusive and broadest conversation about offshore wind that includes those who aren't always standard parts of ocean or renewable energy conversations? That 2 would support development of a far-reaching state vision for what offshore wind could or should look like in California. And 3, that includes a set of cross-cutting principles targeting those goals and processes. These aren't necessarily leaps forward from what is currently happening. It's rather a question of what additional steps can we all come together to help add to the conversations that we can maximize, well, everything. So in a demonstration of my academic affiliation, I could probably keep talking for the rest of the meeting. What I think, but more importantly, I would love to open the discussion amongst the council about offshore wind in California and what we think the council's role can be, either in stimulating conversation, taking on some of the things that both Commissioner Douglas highlighted and other considerations. So maybe we could begin with questions either for some of the experts that have presented today, for Justine and Karen, and then we can move on to discussing ideas for what we, the council, could do to best contribute.
Well, Karen, for, I know there are a lot of folks on the phone that are going to provide public comment, but just for folks that might not be involved in all of these kind of intra-agency conversations, what do you see as sort of key milestones in the coming few years and really opportunities to comment? So right now there's sort of this, the federal government has given allowance to consider projects for this 399 square mile area, but what do you think are sort of key milestones towards, seeing if we can get projects on, on the water and understanding impacts?
That's a great question, and I don't think I was clear enough on it, so this is perfect. So there are a couple official processes that stakeholders who are interested in this should follow. One is the federal process through the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And so if you're interested, especially on the Central Coast and the new 399 area and how that looks different than the Morro Bay call area, BOEM is going to open up a new call to take comment on those areas. And if you've already submitted comment on those areas, because we did go out informally and ask about some of them, your comments will be just taken again. So you don't have to resubmit them. But if you'd like to make comments, there will be a federal process, and the state will be more than happy to just point people the right direction and help facilitate public participation and make sure people know what's going on and have avenues for accessing this. The other really critical process at this stage is the Coastal Commission. The Coastal Commission is the first state agency that has an official action to take in this area. And that's the consistency determination that needs to be part of and made ahead of any lease sale for offshore wind. So I can't go right now into specifics on timeline, but I will just say that we have been talking intensively and frequently with the Coastal Commission about their thoughts here. There will be most likely both an informal, more informational opportunity to engage, and then the Coastal Commission will do what they do. They'll produce staff reports and they'll look at both the Central Coast proposed area and the North Coast proposed area and take those to the commission. And so that's a second opportunity. And then I will just say there will be a third, less formal opportunity facilitated by some of our state agencies where, if your interest is commercial fishing, if your interest is ports, if you're tribal, if your interest is coastal communities or workforce, we will be working hard with some of the additional resources in the budget and some of the resources we're already putting into this to give people opportunities to come to the table and help shape this here in California.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Mark? Sorry, Secretary Crowfoot, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be calling on people or you.
You're driving it. You're driving the discussion.
Mark, go ahead.
All right, thanks, Commissioner Diamond. Just to add to Commissioner Douglas's comment, the Coastal Commission will be holding an informational workshop this fall, and so there'll be a real good opportunity as well for people to weigh in. And I just really want to emphasize again what Commissioner Douglas had said, in that, I mean, we are meeting whether with CEC, State Lands Commission, Coastal Commission, and Fish and Wildlife. And Coastal Commission, probably said them twice, probably because they have regulatory responsibility, that on almost a weekly basis, every other week minimum. And so there's a lot of, we know we need to ramp up much more quickly right now from the standpoint of what data do we actually have, identification of data gaps. If the final budget gets approved, I think there's like $2.2 million in there for filling data gaps, scientific ones, impacts to fisheries, impacts to marine life, impact to cultural resources. We need to make those decisions on with those resources in a very short period of time on what information would be most helpful for the Coastal Commission to complete their consistency determination. And so that's some of the stuff that's going on. Obviously, collaboration is the key, and really, I think that has been going on, and I think that's still a major role for us moving forward at the OPC, is to continue to be part of that collaborative process, and really help try to fill those gaps. Because we do have the ability to sort of get research money out relatively quickly in comparison to some other agencies. To do that. And so I just wanted to bring that up just for additional context in all the things that were presented. And I think that just adds a lot to what Justine was saying, and that we've already invested about $1 million on 4 different studies that will be completed this year that also will provide a great deal of information for the CEC and the Commission.
Thank you, Mark. Are there any other questions from any other members of the council, or any other comments, either Commissioner Douglas or Justine?
And Jordan, I would say too, we can also move at any point you want, we can move to public comment, and that may stimulate more discussion as needed.
Okay. Mike. You're muted.
Thank you, Justine and Karen, for Commissioner Douglas, for your comments, and really helpful. It's an issue. There's an issue. It's not an issue that is significant, I think, at the moment, but I'm sure it's going to be raised potentially by some of the commenters. I'm not totally sure, but what. So I'm in the Santa Barbara area, and obviously we have offshore energy production that's existed for many, many decades. And one, I've heard very mixed things about wind energy in the general Santa Barbara community. Very positive about increasing renewable energy. We'd love to see the fossil fuel industry be made obsolete. But there is a segment of the community that sees wind as a combination of, I'll say, a potential environmental risk, particularly to birds. And to some extent, and this is I'm trying to voice a concern of the community. I don't share this concern, but there is a concern that, hey, we may get rid of all the oil platforms offshore, and now we're going to have a whole new visual addition to the offshore environment. And there's definitely folks that have that concern. I know that we all have to think of this as balancing. I'll put it this way: there's never a free lunch. Everything comes with some kinds of potential impacts, or maybe even actual impacts. And on the whole, I think one of the things I want to express then, and to the extent that the council can help with it, is there are going to be people for whom, I'll just say, aesthetics, it'll be all about the aesthetics, and aren't really necessarily concerned about the overall balance of the potential benefits to their concern compared to their concern. And I want to suggest that we, to the extent that we can, include a component, as well as the Energy Commission and other folks, and include a component about, I'll say, public perceptions of those benefits and, I'll say, impacts or risks, and how they are balanced. It's not that it's not just a simple equation and et cetera. So I'll leave it at that. And I have to apologize. I have to leave the meeting a little early. So if you see me disappear, my apologies to all of you, but thank you so much for your participation, Commissioner Douglas. And thank you again, Justine and Jordan.
Well, thank you for those thoughtful comments. You know, we have heard a range of comments, and we've heard mixed feelings. We've heard strong support. We've heard concerns, you know, over the years of outreach on this. And I do think the outreach component and the community dialogue component of this is so important, because we do have to give people an opportunity to understand what this could mean in all of its many different ways, you know, for us, for our future, for our economy, for the coastal communities, for the workforce, you know, for climate change. And so there's a really important dialogue out there. And for many people, you know, some of us have been working on this for 4 or 5 years, but for many people, you know, they'll be hearing about this for the first time, or taking it seriously for the first time. And we've got to be ready to engage with these folks.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Commissioner Douglas. Maybe we could, in fact, move to some public comment at this point and then return to council discussion.
Looks like we have people ready for public comment. First is going to be Jennifer Savage, followed by Richard Sadowski. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Hi, good afternoon, Secretary Crowfoot, council members. Jennifer Savage, Surfrider Foundation California Policy Manager, calling in from offshore wind-rich Humboldt County. We appreciate today's presentation on California offshore wind development efforts and the conscientious outreach from the state's agencies in general. As California's ocean science leaders, OPC's direction to regulatory bodies is critical to ensure we protect our ocean to the greatest extent possible as we transition to renewable energy in hopes of reducing the harm from climate change. Therefore, we support your incorporation of the following into potential offshore wind projects. Offshore wind developers must avoid and mitigate negative local and regional impacts to wildlife habitat and physical oceanography. Identify existing uses of the project area and use that information to ensure public safety, incorporate environmental justice through tribal consultation, stakeholder engagement, and maintaining access for ocean recreation opportunities. Employ adaptive management, incorporate innovation and new information, and proceed incrementally and cautiously to mitigate cumulative impacts to the marine environment and the ocean animals depending on it. Use predictive modeling and track impacts by using the best available science, frequent monitoring, and baseline data. Finally, As noted, state agencies should provide comprehensive planning and regional ocean data portals easily accessible by the public. I have provided these principles in written form as well for future reference. Thank you for your time today.
Next speaker is going to be Richard Sadowski, followed by Ricky Erickson. Richard, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, OPC. This is Richard Sadowski from Homefront EJ Morro Bay. One of the things that I see here with, first of all, great report. One of the things I see, there are opportunities. What I see is an opportunity with the CCC, the OPC, and the CE, the California Energy Commission, State Lands, and Department of Fish and Game, all collaborating. This might be a great opportunity if all these agencies kind of got together and supported the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary that is up for election, and it might be a good way to start collaborating with not only the Morro Bay fishermen, but with also the First Peoples here, the Northern Chumash. So, I look at this as a catalyst maybe for, decarbonizing California, but also engaging and supporting the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary in this effort. Thank you.
Next speaker is going to be Ricky Erickson, followed by Kristen Hislop. Ricky, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Secretary Crowfoot and members of the Ocean Protection Council and staff. I'm Dr. Ricky Erickson of CMSF for the California Marine Sanctuary Foundation. We wholeheartedly support investing in renewable energy production, given the negative impacts that fossil fuels have on our marine ecosystems. That said, we think that it's imperative to invest wisely and allow for science-driven decision-making as we explore this nation's offshore energy source. We applaud OPC's leadership in prioritizing research to understand the potential impacts to marine life and identify solutions, and we encourage the council to allocate funding to research the interactions between offshore wind farming and our unique and economically important California current. We also encourage OPC to invest in ways to engage the broader diverse populace, allow them to voice their opinions, and increase awareness of potential consequences of offshore wind development. While Californians are generally supportive of wind farming, this is due in part to a general lack of awareness on the complexities of the issue. California is a world leader in ocean conservation in part due to our stakeholder engagement and outreach efforts, and only through communicating the benefits, consequences, and trade-offs of offshore wind and understanding the diverse public perceptions of all Californians can we be empowered to make educated decisions on the siting of future wind farms. We thank you for your dedication, your innovation, and forward thinking on this emerging topic. Californians depend on you to defend our ocean. Thank you very much.
Next speaker is going to be Kristen Hislop, followed by Gary George. Kristen, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. I'm Kristen Hislop, the Director of the Marine Conservation Program at the Environmental Defense Center in Santa Barbara. For more than 40 years, EDC, as we often call ourselves, has been dedicated to ridding our coastline of offshore oil and gas and transitioning to renewable sources. And for the past 5 years, we have been working to advance responsible offshore wind energy in California. So I really appreciate this agenda item on today, and appreciate OPC and CEC for your engagement and leadership on this issue. And importantly, for funding some projects to inform offshore wind in California. We echo what many of our partners and in conservation groups will say and have said today, in that we support offshore wind energy as an important component of transition to renewable energy, but we know that it needs to be done right, and we believe it can be. So we continue to reiterate the asks we have also shared with CEC and BOEM and others, some of which I was really happy to hear Justine mention in her presentation today. First, we see the importance of a planning process that identifies least complex sites that avoid environmental impacts whenever possible and allow for consideration of cumulative impacts. We support funding research to fill gaps in science and monitoring and allow managers and stakeholders to engage with resources such as the California Offshore Wind Energy Gateway. We find that really valuable for us as stakeholders, and support for a focus on federal waters because of the environmental impacts near shore. And because a previous speaker gave a nod to the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary, knowing that that will be very close to any proposed offshore wind, we are very much in support of both and think that we can move forward with both in a respectful manner. So thank you very much for your time today.
Next speaker is Gary George, followed by Mike Conroy. Gary, you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm Gary George, and I'm the director of the Clean Energy Initiative at National Audubon Society. And I'm based here in California and been working on offshore wind since 2016. I just want to highlight one proactive issue regarding birds and offshore wind, and that is that there's a real conundrum in what we would call monitoring in terms of gathering data on site before construction and then gathering data on the collision and displacement while the project is operating. And this, because on land in California, of course, when we have wind projects, we monitor them by walking around and picking up dead birds under the turbines. We're not going to be able to do that offshore, but we are going to be able to provide some technologies that'll be able to record or identify or somehow track these mortalities on those projects. That technology is not available today, but it needs to be. And we're working, it's a priority for Audubon. We're working closely with the Department of Energy, with California Energy Commission peer, with an NYSERDA, to develop those technologies as fast as possible so that we'll have something ready by the time these projects go in. Because California is such a technological leader, so we ask for your support in thinking about the technology advancements that we might be able to make in identifying birds 20 miles out, and also in identifying the impacts at the turbines in 20 miles out, and any funding that might go to research or on this technology would be very helpful. So we want to thank you very much for today's presentation. We always thank Commissioner Douglas for her work on offshore wind, and thank you very much.
Next speaker is Mike Conroy, followed by Michael Stoker. Mike, you have the floor.
Confirming you can hear me.
Yes.
I thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Mike Conroy. I'm the Executive Director of the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations. As Secretary Crowfoot noted, this does further Objective 4, but it also bears noting that Objectives 1 and 6 are likely to be negatively impacted by activities which support Objective 4. As some of you already know, the fishing industry has a lot to say about this, but we've just been looking for someone to actively listen to us. I want to be 100% clear. We are not opposed to well-informed, well-understood renewable energy sources, provided there is meaningful engagement with the fishing industry at every stage in the process. To date, very little of that has occurred. In the interest of time, I'm just going to mention some of the important open questions surrounding the industrialization of the ocean. This is by no means complete and exhausted. With regard to floating infrastructure, we have concerns about the actual footprint size, which includes transmission-related issues. We have serious questions about environmental, ecological, social, and other impacts. For example, to highlight what was brought up in the prior agenda item, will migratory patterns of whales change such that a co-occurrence with trap fisheries increase? I want to highlight that the fisheries data that is available is woefully inadequate, VMS, AIS, and DFW catch information. With certain exceptions, and I do want to call out the Energy Commission, State Lands, and OPC, meaningful engagement has been lacking at every stage to date. To date, we are being told what will happen to us and where, without really any chance to offer any inputs. If you'll bear with me, I just want to address the questions that have been presented for council discussion. What are the highest priority considerations that OPC should be focused on in relation to offshore wind? As outlined above, filling data gaps. You are called the Ocean Protection Council, not the Ocean Let's Deploy New Technologies and Hope for the Best Council. With regard to prioritizing future investments, necessary research to determine impacts to fisheries, fishing communities, ports, harbors, ecological function of the current. How will disadvantaged communities be disproportionately impacted by reduction in seafood harvested by California harvesters? And what role should OPC take in supporting engagement? Hosting regularly scheduled meetings and webinars where meaningful engagement can take place. Thank you.
Mike, thank you. And this is obviously the start of a conversation with OPC. So appreciate and hear your concerns.
Next speaker is Michael Stoker, followed by Brandon Burke. Michael, you have the floor. Michael, you're on mute still.
It just showed up on my screen. Thank you. Good afternoon, Secretary Crowfoot and council members. We appreciate the legacy and ongoing work of OPC. Michael Stocker with Ocean Conservation Research. I'm a marine bioacoustician. And I just want to kind of frame this that wind farms will be transforming large areas of our outer continental shelf with floating wind farms, a technology of which we have limited understanding of biological impacts. The transformation includes physical habitat with mooring lines and electrical cabling. So it'll be good to keep an eye on what's going on in the development of Gulf of Maine floating wind project and also the Norway projects that were mentioned before, and how the North Atlantic right whale interacts with those. Although it's not a species we see on our coast here, will give us an idea of how these large bellum material will interact with obstacles that are artificial in front of them. But our focus is on anthropogenic noise impacts. So we feel that robust baseline and longitudinal data on soundscapes, ocean soundscapes, and exposure impacts of chronic but sub-regulatory threshold noise across all taxa, inclusive of sedentary and pelagic invertebrates. There's some kind of alarming work that's coming out of the North Sea right now in terms of the impacts of burrowing langoustine and how it's disrupting their kind of the settling patterns, how they're fluffing up the substrate. So we'd like to see a lot of effort put onto, as I say, the baselining and longitudinal studies while installing and also as they're operating over time. So thanks a lot for your time. Really appreciate it.
Next speaker is Brandon Burke, followed by Amy Wolfram. Brandon, you have the floor.
Just confirming you can hear me?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Secretary Crowfoot, council members, and members of the public that are participating this afternoon. My name is Brandon Burke. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Regulatory Engagement for the Business Network for Offshore Wind. We are a nonprofit educational organization focused on the development of the U.S. offshore wind industry supply chain and helping American businesses and workers enter the rapidly expanding economic opportunity associated with U.S. offshore wind. That is projected to well exceed $100 billion for wind farm development and construction alone, or CapEx, and that doesn't even account for 30 years of operations and maintenance associated local economic benefits. And although fixed bottom offshore wind was pioneered in European waters, the US right now has the opportunity to be a global leader in developing and deploying floating offshore wind technology. And that opportunity is really led by the West Coast of the United States, specifically California. But we strongly encourage regional collaboration, particularly because of the scale and location of the incredible offshore wind resources along the Pacific coast, but also because this regional collaboration is going to drive visibility of the US Pacific Coast offshore wind market on the crowded global stage. And of course, California does have the opportunity to draw upon the lessons that the US East Coast offshore wind industry has learned, which in turn have been influenced by European experiences. But it's important to keep in mind that California may well influence and spur East Coast states to follow California's example. But speaking more specifically to OPC's mission, objectives 1 focus on an infrastructure resiliency plan, and objectives 4.5 focuses on decarbonizing ports and shipping. And as we're considering these port questions, which are a bit more crystallized on the East Coast, we encourage California to consider utilizing electrified yard equipment, cranes, and other equipment. So the Business Network looks forward to working with California in deploying offshore wind. Thank you.
Next commenter is going to be Amy Wolfram, followed by Lauren Cullum. Amy, you have the floor.
Holly, I'm so sorry. Can I interrupt just for one moment? Because I know Commissioner Douglas has to leave for a very relevant tribal consultation meeting related to offshore wind. So if we could just take a moment just to say thank you again, Commissioner, for joining the conversation. And we're so grateful for the work that you've done, for the continuing conversation, and look forward to continuing the dialogue.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm sorry I can't hear all the comments and any ongoing discussion, but I know that Mark and I and many others will be in touch on this and on follow-up. And I just appreciate the time on offshore wind today and look forward to more work on this. Thank you.
And Holly, back over to you. Thank you.
Sure. Amy, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Hello, I'm Amy Wolfram, Monterey Bay Aquarium's California Ocean Conservation Policy Manager. At Monterey Bay Aquarium, we understand that climate change is challenging ocean health in profound ways. The aquarium recognizes that responsible development of offshore wind energy can help to address this challenge, meet California's renewable energy goals, reduce the use of fossil fuels and build a low carbon economy, as well as slow the worst impacts of climate change disproportionately affecting low-income communities and communities of color. It is also imperative that we avoid or mitigate as much as possible the impacts of offshore wind development on California's ocean wildlife and ecosystems. We very much appreciate the previous OPC funding for research projects to provide the information critically needed to advance offshore wind in an environmentally sustainable way, specifically the funding for the Conservation Biology Institute and Point Blue Conservation Science projects. We encourage OPC to continue to support research necessary to avoid or minimize the impacts on our ocean wildlife and ecosystems. We also appreciate and support the crucial role the OPC plays in protecting our ocean as this process continues. We hope that you will continue to be the strong voice for ocean health. Thank you for addressing this important issue and bringing this item up for discussion today.
Thank you. And next speaker is going to be Lauren Cullum, followed by Kate Kelly. Lauren, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you so much. Lauren Cullum, Policy Advocate with Sierra Club California, representing 13 local chapters in California and 500,000 members and supporters in the state. I'd like to thank Justine, Jordan, and Commissioner Douglas for the great presentations, as well as for the follow-up discussion. Sierra Club California supports the development of offshore wind in an environmentally responsible manner. We agree that offshore wind is an important resource that will help us move towards meeting our state's decarbonization and climate change goals, and also grow a new industry that supports thousands of well-paying jobs. But it must be developed responsibly for ecosystems, wildlife, and people. Avoiding sensitive habitat areas, requiring strong measures to protect wildlife and ecosystems throughout each stage of the development process, and comprehensive monitoring of wildlife and habitat before, during, and after construction are essential for the responsible development of this technology. In addition, the processes associated with developing offshore wind energy, such as data collection and siting, should be as inclusive and transparent as possible. An inclusive stakeholder process can help identify areas of least conflict that can then inform the process for decision-making and also reflect those environmental and other concerns. And OPC will play a crucial role as a coordinating agency to ensure this inclusive, transparent, and science-driven process occurs. So to conclude, Sierra Club California supports responsibly developed offshore wind energy that will take into account the potential impacts on marine ecosystems and wildlife, and terrestrial, considering changes to the transmission infrastructure, as well as a process that allows for various communities and stakeholders to be informed and given opportunities for input along the way. We'd like to thank the OPC for your work on offshore wind and for bringing this item up today. And we look forward to working with the OPC as well as other agencies on this issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next speaker is going to be Kate Kelly, followed by Tom Hafer. Kate, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Chair, Council members, and staff. Thank you for holding this conversation today. Defenders of Wildlife supports responsibly sited and developed and operated offshore wind off the coast of California. We share and reiterate the excellent comments that our conservation colleagues have made this afternoon. California is in a unique position, as we often are, to be a leader in the development of offshore wind, and both for California, but as a leader in how it can be developed worldwide. And we, for this purpose, encourage a whole of government approach to getting offshore wind and handling the heavy lift that's going to need to happen or to make it happen for us, as well as looking at the project as a whole. Offshore wind cannot exist in a vacuum. We need to look at both what happens on the marine side, the gen tie to bring the energy to the coast, the coastal development to support the offshore wind, and the transmission. And we encourage the projects to be considered as a large integrated piece that we bring into our energy planning process. We ask that the council continue its strong support and funding for offshore wind development and the information that we need to generate in order to be able to make science-based decisions to move forward with it. And specifically, we request the continued funding for the Conservation Biology Institute, CBI, Point Blue, and in particular, the Offshore Wind Gateway. As with the DRECP process, the Gateway also provides an integral part of both the transparent and public engagement process, as well as supports science-based decisions. We thank you for your time today, and we look forward to continuing this conversation.
Next speaker is Tom Hafer, followed by Sandy Ailsworth. Tom, you have the floor.
Okay, you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Good afternoon, Ocean Protection Council. This is Tom Hafer. I'm the president of the Morro Bay Fishing Organization and a commercial fisherman out of Morro Bay. I submitted written comments of all the fishermen, and there's probably a lot I left off that paper I sent you guys of our concerns. One of the things I mentioned in that paper was the UK study showing a 91% decline in landings around wind farms. The fishermen are definitely going to be impacted about this whole project. Is going to impact the fishermen. It's going to impact Morro Bay. It's going to impact a lot of things that we've done for centuries here. So I just want to make sure that the fishermen should be involved with the impact studies, stock assessments, local fishermen that have fished these areas for years, that can come up with a good monitoring program. It's not that difficult to do. We've done plenty of them here in Morro Bay. There's a conflict of interest if people do these studies that have a financial benefit gain from this project. So I really think you should keep it to the locals to do it, working with whoever, Cal Poly, any of the universities. 400 square miles of windmills, 300 windmills possibly. It's going to affect the ocean immensely. And I hope you guys realize that, because it's not like, an oil platform. These are windmills in the water, hundreds of them. Thank you.
Next speaker is Sandy Ailsworth, followed by Mike Okanewski. Sandy, you have the floor.
What?
Hi, June. Good afternoon. My name is Sandy Ailsworth, and I am a senior oceans advocate with NRDC. Thank you, OPC and Commissioner Douglas, though I know she's gone, for the presentation on offshore wind today. NRDC is strongly supportive of responsible offshore wind development and wants to express its gratitude to OPC for the crucial role that it has played and will hopefully continue to play in advancing floating offshore wind development in a way that imposes the least impact on local marine environments. Both OPC and CEC have been key partners in representing both the energy and ocean protection equities as the state of California works to advance offshore wind development through its participation in the BOEM California Renewable Energy Task Force. NRDC recognizes Objective 4.4 in the OPC strategic plan, and we would just like to express our enthusiastic support for the approach that is outlined in that goal and Objective 4.4. NRDC is also supportive of OPC support for the Offshore Wind Gateway and the Point Blue and Conservation Biology Institute's least conflict geospatial analysis of the hundreds of data sets that are contained in the Gateway. As supporters of responsible offshore wind development, NRDC and many of our colleagues who have already spoken firmly believe that a least conflict siting approach that is both protective of the local environment and that is ultimately supportive of the offshore wind industry. As most people here know, we face two crises that threaten human survival: climate change and biodiversity loss. Over the past decade, NRDC and many colleagues, again, that are here and who have already spoken today, have worked in support of renewable energy, and we've operated. Thank you.
And our last speaker is going to be Michael Okanewski. Michael, you have the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to comment. I'm going to be pretty brief. I've been in business processing and sales for the last 2 years, and I just have to say that I've talked to well over 200 fishermen and processors by this point. I can't think of any one of them that I talked to that would not agree with what Mike Conroy had to bring up. The process that we doing is best as we are as fishing people, fishing industry, we are being looked after and have a transparent process.
And I believe we may have lost Mike.
Let's give him a moment to try to jump back on.
Okay.
Holly, are there any other?
No one else. That Mike was our last, and I think he's back. Let's see. Nope, he's got permission to talk.
Mike, are you back on?
No.
He was breaking up pretty bad. I don't think he's back.
Okay. Well, if he does come back on, we can consider if we can have him provide public comment in the general public comment item.
Perfect.
That's a likely solution here.
So that wraps up our public comments, other than if Mike comes back. Maybe I can just say on behalf of the council, thank you to everyone for the great comments and the diversity of comments that were offered. I'm deeply appreciative of that. I know we have gone over our allotted time for this agenda item, so we should probably wrap up the discussion, but hopefully this is a good beginning for kind of ongoing council and public dialogue about how to keep going forward, reflecting many of the concerns and objectives mentioned by the commenters. Secretary Crowfoot.
Yeah, I was just going to make maybe one sort of broad point, which is there's obviously a lot of desire among a broad range of stakeholders to stay engaged and at the table as this is discussed. And so this seems like a role for OPC to play, not necessarily to convene all these discussions, but just to make sure all of these viewpoints are taken into account and people feel like they understand the process and their input is meaningful, and definitely take note of the commercial fishing leaders that feel like that, broadly speaking, offshore wind development hasn't included their perspective and they have real concerns around the impacts on their livelihoods. So, Mark, I know you're aware of this and we all value this, but I think it's just really important to take a really complicated, sometimes opaque process, as it relates to how these projects get developed, and just make sure that we're providing as many appropriate opportunities for input as possible, so that people feel like, wherever they land on the actual technology, they feel like they've been heard and understood in the process and been able to shape the discussion.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Secretary Crowfoot. I think that's why, we were so eager to get this item on the agenda in a timely manner. So we appreciate everyone's flexibility in making that happen. But, there were some common themes that we heard today, and ones that sort of echo some of the comments that we've heard, especially from the fishing community. And I know our partners at the department are going to be heavily involved on engagement. I also know there's a little bit of a concern on, really who's doing the engaging. And so I think Fish and Wildlife, and I think OPC, in really looking at this from an environmental protection standpoint and a fisheries protection standpoint makes sense. Just realize there's also a lot of engagement going on from BOEM, where there might not be quite the same sort of relationship. And so we need to also keep track of that as well. But couldn't agree with you more on the need for us to really ramp up our engagement there.
Thank you. If I could add on, just completely support that sentiment generally, and might also just make a distinction sometimes between engagement and information sharing, and that there may be some, I'll call it lighter lift work that can be done to significantly increase the information sharing and make it easier for folks to gather information about what meetings are happening where, regardless of who is hosting them, if it's related to offshore wind, what meetings are occurring, what legislative hearings might be taking place, what even kind of non-governmental conferences or events may be pulled together, and where you can access more information. So the question about making information available could be separated a little bit from the deep and complicated questions, and obviously vitally important questions of genuine kind of two-way engagement.
Really good point. So to me, this is sort of almost like an open discussion item. There will be a lot of focus on this in coming months and years, and I think we want to maintain, sort of a central position for OPC. So my recommendation, Jordan, would be that we, keep this agendized from time to time so that we're getting updates, and at the right time, providing opportunities for the public to comment on the process that's unfolding. That makes sense. Excellent. Good stuff. Jordan, thanks for your work on this and facilitating that conversation. We will forge on in the agenda, and we are rounding third on our way to home as it relates to working our way through the agenda. The next item is item number 7, which is a consent item, which is consideration of authorization to disperse additional funds for urchin removal, support potential kelp forest recovery. So it's a consent item because it would approve a minor budget augmentation to support the urchin removal effort that we approved last February. And so we're going to allow Mike Escrow just to provide for just a little bit of explanation. If any council member wants to remove the item from consent and bring forward to discuss, they may do so. And then if they don't, then we will ask for a motion and second a vote. Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Secretary Crowfoot and council members. We can keep this pretty informal. I don't have slides or anything like that because, as you noted, this is just a minor budget augmentation to really account for or compensate for delays that were associated with COVID-19. As you mentioned, you approved this project back in February of 2020, and ReefCheck spent the next month, ReefCheck, which is the grantee that's managing this program, hiring staff and conducting pre-restoration surveys, and then the entire world changed and things were on hold for about 6 months. So we are basically just extending the project out by another 6 months to allow for the inclusion of that second site, which is Albion Cove. And I will just say that so far the project has been really promising. The commercial urchin divers have done a great job in removing, I think it's about 26,000 pounds of urchin over 10 acres. We haven't done any major before-after comparison yet, so we can't really say anything in terms of the science of the effectiveness of that restoration. But just anecdotally, I was just informed, I guess last week by a contact up there, that there is reproductive kelp on the surface at the restoration site, which is pretty cool to see, given that ocean conditions have been better this year. So I think I'll leave it at that for now, but happy to take any questions that council members may have.
Just say awesome work, Mike. And just the idea that there's 26,000 pounds of that horrible purple sea urchins removed is awesome. And pending no other questions from other council members, I would move the consent item.
Good. Matt, was you good with seconding that?
I second that motion.
Excellent. And I think we can do this by voice vote. All in favor of the consent item, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nay. Oh, sorry, none. So that is approved with unanimous support. So now we move on to the last agenda item of our discussion today, and that is public comment on any item that was not specifically on the agenda. So Holly, can you call on any members of the public that want to provide public comment at this time?
Gladly. Our first speaker is going to be Richard Sadowski, followed by Corey Puccini. Richard, you have the floor.
A great meeting. Council always learned a lot, and I'm really encouraged by the work Michael's doing with the urchin divers. That's some hardcore diving up there, and the work is encouraging. One of the things that our group has we've done, we had a community grant from Morro Bay, and what we did is we were monitoring carbon dioxide around the Morro Bay estuary for the past year, and we had collected the data, and I will share that data with your staff, and I might have shared some of it already. But what it showed is our average CO2, atmospheric CO2 around the estuary was 456 parts per million. And recently, if you look at the Keeling curve, it has accelerated. The acceleration of atmospheric carbon dioxide has basically doubled in the last, since the new millennium. And when we look at ocean acidification and all these different issues that we're kind of face, we need to start looking at that more of a three-pronged approach, where we need to take air, the convection cycle of an estuary. And this is where I kind of go back to, like, years ago, they had these biodiversity action plans, and they're like, in England, I think they had one. But one of the things here is what they realize is it's not the size of them, it's that they have that diversity. And we in Morro Bay have an estuary that we had lost 90% of our eelgrass since 2007, and we have our friends that are saying that it's coming back. And one of the things is I would like to see that more emphasis given to these little jewels that are along our coast, our coastal estuaries, and really give some funding for monitoring and citizen science. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is going to be Corey Puccini, followed by Suzanne Cumming. Corey, you have the floor.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot and council members. My name is Corey Puccini, and I'm the California Conservation Manager at Wild Coast, and also the co-chair of the San Diego County MPA Collaborative. I'm going to use my time today to acknowledge OPC's Climate Resilience and Coastal MPA Network report. Specifically Wild Coast and the San Diego MPA Support Strategy 2 to employ new and existing tools and partnerships to maximize the benefits of a climate resilient MPA network. We believe this is the right approach and includes a subsection that specifically spells out the need to protect, restore, and expand sensitive coastal habitats to enhance climate resilience. And our organization see this subsection as disproportionately important to the success of the MPA network and the state's 30 by 30 initiative. That's specifically section 2.1.3. We'd like to encourage OPC to continue to incorporate language surrounding blue carbon into strategic planning and implementation. And we also broadly invite those interested to join the newly formed California Blue Carbon Collaborative, which some members already have. We've seen great participation from OPC and state agencies to date and are looking to expand on our success. California right now is ripe for wetland restoration to enhance the ecological services provided by coastal wetlands and salt marshes. We have many shovel-ready projects ready to go and encourage the council to consider directing additional funds to restoration efforts. This last round of Prop 1 funding, I believe there was 7 times more applicants than the previous round. So there's a demonstrated need for those additional funds. And to learn more about some of our work and California Blue Carbon Collaborative, please visit wildcoast.org. And thank you for your time.
All right. And our last speaker is going to be Suzanne Cumming. Suzanne, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, OPC. I'm Suzanne Cumming, an attorney and member of Sierra Club Bayona Committee. First, I'd like to mention that the City of LA, Culver City, and City of Santa Monica councils all have voted to send a letter to the governor recommending that the Southern California Gas methane storage facility underneath the wetlands be closed. Second, regarding sea level rise, Alternative 4, the general alternative, would be better to address sea level rise than the current bulldozing plan. People on our team have reviewed documents submitted to the Army Corps of Engineers. They read like a construction plan. Everything will be cleared and grubbed. The conclusions in the EIR are based on incorrect and outdated facts. Using these or current data shows that in the future, the Bayona wetlands would become mostly mudflats. The levees that are in place now, but would be demolished under this plan, actually protect the reserve habitats from sea level rise. Claims that the reserve would be inundated if they don't do this project are untrue. The tide gates can easily be adjusted for further protection. If another tide gate is needed, then that would be about a $2 million project, not a $250 million project that would forever alter the habitat, so it's unsuitable for many of the species the state is supposed to be protecting. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes public comment and agenda item 8. And that brings us to the end of our meeting. I want to announce that our next meeting will take place on September 14th from 11 to 3 p.m. Our location is to be determined, and we may, depending on how this new normal evolves, actually recommend that we convene as a council in person, which I think would be welcome to many of us who really enjoy being together in person. But in any event, September 14th, 11 to 3 is our date of our next meeting. Huge thanks to everybody who has contributed to the meeting. As always, Mark and Jen, your OPC staff has done remarkable work over the last year plus, staying focused, moving forward on our strategic plan, despite so much uncertainty and challenge in our own professional and personal lives. So huge thanks. Mark, I'm excited with the prospect of you getting your team together in person with those new hires and those all-important paid interns, which we're really excited about welcoming. So we are excited for the work to continue. Any final thoughts from our council members?
Awesome meeting. Thanks, everyone.